A single Russian sentence destroyed her entire life. Celine Vale was just a poor student working as a waitress to earn money for her grandmother's cancer treatment. But when she inadvertently spoke fluent Russian in front of Kyle Voronin, Chicago's most dangerous crime boss, everything changed. Within 6 hours, Selena was taken to a penthouse on the 60th floor, offered money, power, and a simple choice: work for him or disappear forever. But the most dangerous thing wasn't the guns. It was the way he looked at her, as if she already belonged to him. Watch to the end, and comment the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has progressed. The snow came down like broken teeth. Celine Vale's hands shook as she balanced the silver tray loaded with champagne flutes, each glass worth more than her monthly rent. The private dining room at Velvet Room hummed with low voices speaking a language she wasn't supposed to understand. Russian, thick, guttural, laced with the kind of authority that didn't need volume. She kept her eyes down. Rule number 1 of working at Chicago's most exclusive restaurant: see nothing, hear nothing, survive your shift. The men around the table wore suits that cost what her grandmother's chemo treatments did. $5,000 a session. Celine had counted. She'd counted everything lately: pills, days, the growing stack of medical bills turning her kitchen table into a paper graveyard. "Another round," one of them said in English, snapping his fingers without looking at her. Celine moved forward, her cheap heels clicking against marble floors that probably cost more per square foot than her entire apartment. She refilled glasses with practiced efficiency, trying not to think about the fact that she had exactly $47 in her checking account and her grandmother's next appointment was in 3 days. Then she heard it. "Volkov is moving shipments through the south terminals," one man said in Russian, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "He thinks we don't know. He thinks he's clever." Celine's hand jerked. A single drop of champagne hit the table. Nobody noticed, except him. Kyle Voronin sat at the head of the table like a king holding court in shadows. He hadn't spoken once since she'd entered the room 20 minutes ago. Didn't need to. The others orbited him, their entire focus pulled toward him like gravity had shifted in his direction. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, maybe? Dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so cold. Sharp cheekbones. Pale eyes that looked gray in the dim light. The kind of eyes that weighed you, measured you, and decided your value in the space between heartbeats. Those eyes found her now. Celine felt her throat close. "She spilled," one of the men said, pointing at the tiny drop of champagne. "It's fine," Celine said quickly, reaching for her cloth. You understand Russian." Kael's voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. It wasn't a question. The room went silent. Every man at that table turned to look at her. 6 pairs of eyes. 6 men who'd probably killed before. Who'd probably kill again. Celine's pulse hammered against her ribs. No, I don't. Oh, you flinched when Dmitri mentioned Volkov. Kyle leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the table, fingers drumming a slow rhythm. Your hand shook. Native speakers recognize their own language even when they're pretending not to listen. "I don't know what Where did you learn it?" He spoke over her like she hadn't made a sound. Celine's mouth went dry. The tray felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "My grandmother, she's from St. Petersburg. I grew up speaking it at home." One of the men muttered something ugly in Russian, something about liabilities. Kyle held up a hand. Silence dropped like a curtain. "Interesting," he said, switching to flawless Russian now, his accent pure Moscow. "And what exactly did you hear just now?" "Nothing." Celine forced the word out. "I wasn't listening. I just serve drinks, that's all." Kale studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're lying," he said in English, "but you're scared enough to be smart about it. That's useful." He gestured to one of his men. "Take her information. We'll need to verify her story." "Wait." Celine stepped back, the tray tilting dangerously. "I didn't hear anything. I swear, I don't even—" "Relax." Kale's voice was calm, too calm. "If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to worry about. If you're not—" He shrugged. "Well, we'll find out either way." One of the men stood, a mountain of muscle in an expensive suit, and moved toward her. Celine's legs locked. Her grandmother's face flashed through her mind, pale, thin, hooked up to machines that beeped and hissed and kept her alive one expensive day at a time. If Celine disappeared, who would pay for that? "Please," she whispered. "I need this job. I need—" "Your name," the man said. His English was heavily accented, each word dropping like a stone. "Celine. Celine Vale." He pulled out his phone and typed something. Waited. His expression didn't change. Cale watched her the entire time. Those pale eyes tracked every breath, every twitch of her fingers on the tray, every micro-expression that flickered across her face. "She's clean," the man finally said. "Graduate student. Northwestern. Linguistics. No record. Works 3 jobs. Grandmother in hospice care at Northwestern Memorial." Cale's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Hospice?" "Cancer," Celine said quietly. "Stage 4. Something shifted in Cale's expression. Not sympathy. Something colder. Calculation. "Expensive," he observed. "Yes. And you're paying for it by serving champagne to men you don't want to hear." It wasn't a question, but Celine nodded anyway. Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. He was tall, over 6 feet, and moved with the kind of controlled grace that came from years of violence barely leashed. He walked toward her. Celine's instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet stayed planted. Running would make it worse. Running always made it worse. Cale stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. "You have a choice," he said quietly, just to her. "You can walk out of here tonight and forget everything you heard. Forget this conversation. Forget you ever saw my face. I'll make sure your grandmother's treatments are covered for the next 6 months. Anonymous donation. You'll never see me again." Celine's breath caught. "What's the other option?" His smile was thin. "You work for me." "Doing what?" "Translation, cultural consulting. I do business with people from your grandmother's part of the world. People who appreciate authenticity. You'd be useful. And if I say no to both?" Kyle tilted his head slightly. "Then we have a problem. Because you heard things tonight that could be very valuable to the wrong people. And I don't leave problems unsolved." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but perfectly clear. Celine's hands were still shaking. "That's not a choice. It's the only one you're getting." She wanted to scream, wanted to throw the tray at his face and run, but her grandmother's face hovered in her mind. The way she smiled even when the pain was bad, the way she held Celine's hand and whispered in Russian that everything would be okay. She couldn't let her die alone. 6 months? Celine asked. "Guaranteed. Cash. Untraceable. And if I work for you? Then your grandmother gets the best care available for as long as she needs it. Private room, experimental treatments, whatever it takes." Celine closed her eyes, felt tears burning behind her lids. This was how it happened, she realized. This was how people like her got pulled into worlds they didn't belong in. Not with guns or threats or violence, with love, with desperation, with the kind of choice that wasn't a choice at all. "I'll work for you," she whispered. When she opened her eyes, Kael was already turning away. "Good. Dimitri will take you home. Pack what you need. You start tomorrow." "Wait, what do you mean, pack?" "You'll be staying at my property downtown. Safer that way. Someone will move your things by morning." "I can't just—" Kael looked back at her, and the cold weight of his gaze crushed whatever protest she'd been forming. "You agreed to work for me, Miss Vale. That means you're under my protection now. It also means you're a potential target. I don't leave assets unguarded." "I'm not an asset." "Yes," he said simply. "You are." Then he was gone, sweeping out of the room with his men following like shadows. Celine stood there, the tray still in her hands, champagne glasses trembling. She'd just sold herself to the Wolf King of Chicago, and she had no idea if she'd just saved her grandmother's life or destroyed her own. The penthouse was a cage made of glass and steel. Celine stood in the middle of the living room at 3 a.m, her small suitcase by the door, and tried not to have a panic attack. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan, the water black and endless under the night sky. The city sprawled behind her, lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. The space was massive, easily 4,000 square feet, decorated in cold minimalism. Black leather, chrome, abstract art that probably cost more than her student loans. No personal photos, no books, nothing that suggested a human being actually lived here. Just money, just power, just emptiness. Your room is down the hall, second door on the right. Celine spun around. Kael stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit but with the jacket gone and his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. She could see scars on his forearms, old ones, the kind that came from knives, not accidents. I thought, she swallowed, I thought you'd have guards or something. I do. They're outside, but you're not a prisoner, Miss Vale. You're an employee. Then why can't I stay at my own apartment? Because 3 hours ago, someone tried to break into it. The air left Celine's lungs. Kael moved into the room, pouring himself a glass of something amber from a crystal decanter. My people stopped them. No one was hurt. But the message was clear. Someone knows I'm interested in you, which means you're valuable, which means you're not safe. Who would... Oh, rivals, competitors, people who want to know what I'm planning. He took a sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. Welcome to my world, Miss Vale. Information is currency, and you just became very expensive. Celine's legs felt weak. She sat down on the nearest chair before she could stop herself. This is insane. I'm nobody. I just serve drinks and study dead languages. You speak fluent Russian with a St. Petersburg accent. You understand cultural nuances that most translators miss. And more importantly, he paused, you're desperate enough to say yes, but smart enough to be afraid. That makes you controllable, predictable, useful. The casual cruelty of it hit her like a slap. You're a bastard, she said quietly. Kael's expression didn't change. Yes. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a soft click. There are rules. You don't leave this building without security. You don't contact anyone from your old life without my approval. You don't ask questions about my business unless I invite them. In exchange, your grandmother gets the care she needs, you get paid more in a month than you'd make in a year serving champagne, and you stay alive. What if I break the rules? Then we revisit our arrangement. The threat was implicit, clear. Celine looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Exhaustion. It was buried deep, hidden behind the cold control and the expensive clothes. But it was there, in the tightness around his eyes. The way he held himself, like even relaxing, was a risk he couldn't afford. He was barely older than her, but he looked like he'd lived 100 years. Why me? She asked. You could hire any translator in Chicago. Why drag a grad student into this? Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because professionals have loyalties, connections, agendas. You have none of those things. You have a dying grandmother and $47 in your bank account. That makes you mine. The possessiveness in the word made her skin crawl. And worse, some dark, twisted part of her almost liked it. She shoved that feeling down deep and stood. Where's my room? Kael nodded toward the hallway. Second door. There's a phone on the nightstand. It only calls one number, mine. Use it if you need anything. Celine grabbed her suitcase and walked past him, careful not to get too close. She could feel his eyes on her the entire way. When she reached the hallway, he spoke again. Miss Vale. She stopped, didn't turn around. You made the right choice tonight. Celine's hands tightened on the suitcase handle. We'll see. She didn't wait for his response. The first meeting happened 2 days later. Celine sat in a conference room inside one of Kael's downtown properties, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that housed what the public believed was a legitimate investment firm. The reality was messier, darker, but the marble floors and expensive art created a convincing illusion. 4 men sat across from her, Russian, older. They wore suits that screamed old money and expressions that suggested they'd seen violence most people couldn't imagine. Kael sat at the head of the table, silent and watchful. This is insulting, one of the men said in Russian. You bring a girl to translate? You don't trust our English? Celine kept her face neutral, waiting. Kael didn't respond, just looked at her. This was a test, she realized. He wanted to see how she'd handle it. She leaned forward slightly and responded in Russian, her accent flawless. Mr. Voronin trusts that you prefer to negotiate, batki in your native language. Nuance is often lost in translation. He wants to make sure nothing is misunderstood. The man's eyebrow lifted. Your accent. St. Petersburg? My grandmother's. Interesting. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Tell Mr. Voronin we're prepared to discuss the shipment routes, but we need assurances about security. Celine translated smoothly, switching between languages without hesitation. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, she'd navigated 3 near arguments, clarified a crucial misunderstanding about timing, and helped broker a deal worth $7 million in what she was pretty sure were illegally imported electronics. When the Russians left, Kyle dismissed his security and turned to her. Well done. Celine felt sick. I just helped you commit a felony. Several, actually. He stood, buttoning his jacket. But who's counting? I could go to the police. You could. Cale's voice was calm. But you won't. Because your grandmother started her new treatment yesterday. Experimental immunotherapy. $90,000 per round. You'd never afford it on your own. The nausea got worse. He was right. He was always right. I hate you, she said quietly. Cale paused at the door. That's fine. Hate is better than fear. Fear makes people unpredictable. Then he was gone. Celine sat alone in the conference room, staring at her hands. They'd stopped shaking somewhere during the meeting, steadied by adrenaline and necessity and the horrible realization that she was good at this. She understood these men, understood their culture, their pride, their unspoken rules. She could read the room in ways that transcended language, and Kyle knew it. He'd seen something in her that she hadn't even known was there. Something useful, something dangerous. 3 weeks in, Celine's life had become unrecognizable. She lived in a penthouse overlooking the city, wore clothes that cost more than her monthly student loan payments, attended meetings with criminals who controlled more money than most corporations. And every night, she called her grandmother from the private phone in her room and lied. I got a new job, she said, forcing brightness into her voice. Corporate translation, really good pay. That's how I'm covering your treatments. Her grandmother's voice was weak but warm. You work too hard, Dorogaya. I'm fine, babushka, I promise. She wasn't fine, she was drowning. But every time she thought about walking away, she'd visit the hospital and see her grandmother sitting up in bed, color in her cheeks, talking about maybe going home soon. The treatments were working. Cale's blood money was saving her life. And Celine couldn't figure out which made her feel more trapped, the penthouse or the guilt. The knock on her bedroom door came at midnight. Come in, she called, setting down her book. Cale entered, still dressed despite the late hour. He looked tired, more tired than usual. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Celine sat up straighter. What kind of problem? The kind that requires you to make a choice. Her stomach sank. What choice? Cale crossed to her window, looking out at the city. One of my associates was arrested this morning, federal charges. He's talking to prosecutors, giving names. Your name? Eventually. Cale's reflection in the glass was expressionless. But there's a way to stop it. A contact in the prosecutor's office, Russian heritage. We need someone to approach him, build rapport, find out exactly what they know and what they're planning. Celine felt cold. You want me to spy? I want you to have a conversation, in Russian, with someone who'll trust you because you remind him of home. That's not translation. That's survival. Kyle turned to face her. Mine. Yours. Your grandmother's. If this investigation moves forward, my assets get frozen. That includes the fund paying for her treatments. The threat was implicit but clear. Help him, or watch her grandmother die. You son of a bitch, Celine whispered. Yes. No apology, no justification, just acknowledgement. Celine stood, her hands clenching into fists. And if I say no, then I respect your choice, and I stop paying for treatments I can no longer afford to fund. That's not a choice. That's extortion. That's reality, Miss Vale. I gave you a way out 3 weeks ago. You chose to stay. This is what staying means. Celine wanted to scream. wanted to throw something, wanted to run until her legs gave out, and she collapsed somewhere far away from this glass cage and the man who owned it. But her grandmother's face floated in her mind, smiling, hopeful, alive. When? The word came out broken. Tomorrow night. Charity gala at the Drake Hotel. He'll be there. I'll introduce you. The rest is up to you. Cale walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I know what I'm asking isn't fair. Then don't ask. I can't afford that luxury. He looked back at her, and for just a moment, she saw something human in his eyes, something that might have been regret. Neither can you. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Celine stood alone in her beautiful prison and finally let herself cry. Tack. The Drake Hotel glittered like a jewelry box made of marble and gold. Celine wore a black dress that hugged her body like a second skin, something Kael's people had delivered that afternoon with matching heels that cost more than her rent. Her hair was swept up, her makeup perfect. She looked like she belonged here. She felt like an imposter wearing someone else's life. Kael appeared at her side, devastating in a black tuxedo. Ready? No. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He offered his arm. His name is Anton Breslov, assistant prosecutor. Ambitious, nostalgic. He'll be by the bar around 9. Celine took his arm because she had to, because the alternative was watching her grandmother die. They moved through the crowd like royalty. People parted for Kael without realizing they were doing it. Some nodded in recognition. Most just felt the danger radiating off him and instinctively stepped back. Celine had learned to feel it too, the weight of violence barely contained. There, Kael murmured, nodding toward the bar. Anton Breslov was in his 40s, graying at the temples, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen things that kept him up at night. He stood alone, nursing a vodka and looking uncomfortable in his rented tux. Go, Kael said quietly. I'll be watching. Celine forced her feet to move. She ordered a drink at the bar, something she wouldn't actually drink, and positioned herself next to Anton. Waited. After a moment, he glanced at her. Did a double take. Apologies, he said in lightly accented English. I didn't mean to stare, you just remind me of someone. Celine smiled. My grandmother always said I have one of those faces. Russian? She let surprise flicker across her expression. How did you... Your bone structure, the way you hold yourself. He smiled back. I'm Russian too. Well, American now, but Moscow born. St. Petersburg, Celine said. My grandmother's from there. I grew up speaking it at home. His expression warmed immediately. It's rare to meet someone who speaks proper Russian in Chicago. Most people here think they're fluent after watching 3 Tolstoy films. Celine laughed, genuinely this time, and switched to Russian. My grandmother would have your head if she heard me speaking anything but proper St. Petersburg dialect. Anton's whole face lit up. Your accent is perfect, like hearing home. They talked for 20 minutes. About St. Petersburg, about the differences between Moscow and Petersburg Russians, about the food he missed, the music, the gray winters along the Neva River. Celine felt herself relaxing despite everything. Anton was kind, lonely, homesick for a country he'd left behind decades ago. She liked him, which made what she was doing so much worse. So what brings you to Chicago? Anton asked, switching back to English as the bartender refilled his vodka. Graduate school, linguistics, Northwestern. Ah, and the fancy dress? Celine hesitated. I work for someone who needed a translator tonight. Anyone I'd know? This was it, the moment. Celine felt Kael's eyes on her from across the room, felt the weight of her grandmother's life in her hands. Probably not, she said lightly. Corporate stuff. Pretty boring. Anton nodded, but something shifted in his expression. A flicker of suspicion. He'd seen her with Kael. He knew. And Celine realized with sudden, horrible clarity that this entire conversation was a trap. Not for Anton. For her. Kael was testing her, seeing if she'd lie, if she'd protect him, if she was truly his. Anton set down his glass. I should go. It was lovely meeting you, Celine. He knew her name. She'd never told him her name. Wait. But he was already walking away, his shoulders tight, his hand sliding into his jacket pocket, reaching for his phone. Celine's heart hammered. She looked across the room and found Kael's eyes. He stood utterly still, watching her with the cold focus of a predator deciding whether to strike. She had seconds to choose. Let Anton go and risk him connecting her to Kael, putting both of them in danger. Or stop him. Become complicit. Cross the line she'd been trying not to cross since this nightmare began. Celine's feet moved before her brain caught up. She caught Anton's arm just as he reached the exit. "Please," she said in Russian, her voice urgent. "Please don't." Anton looked down at her hand, then at her face. Understanding dawned. "You're working for him," he said quietly. "For Voronin." "I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. My grandmother is dying. He's paying for her treatments. I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't let her die." Anton's expression softened, but the phone stayed in his hand. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I have a job to do, and Voronin is a murderer." "I know," the words came out as a whisper. "I know what he is. But if you make that call, I lose everything. Please, I'm begging you." Anton looked at her for a long moment, then at Kael, who stood across the ballroom, perfectly still, perfectly patient. "He owns you," Anton said. It wasn't a question. Celine felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Yes." Anton pulled his arm free gently. "Then I'm sorry for you, but that doesn't change what I have to do." He turned toward the exit, and Celine heard herself say the words that would damn her. "He knows about your daughter." Anton froze. Celine's voice kept going, pulling information from some dark place she hadn't known existed inside her. "Anna, 23, graduate student at Columbia. She doesn't know about the money you send every month, the money you can't afford on a prosecutor's salary." Anton's face went pale. "Walk away," Celine said quietly. "Forget you saw me here. Forget this conversation." And he forgets about Anna. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. Except she knew Kael, knew how he operated, how he collected information like weapons and used them with surgical precision. If he'd sent her to talk to Anton, he already knew everything about him, including his weaknesses. Anton's hand trembled on his phone. "You're making a mistake." "I know. He'll destroy you." "I know that too." Anton looked at her one more time, saw whatever he needed to see. Then he slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked away, not toward the exit, toward the bar. Celine stood there, shaking, as the full weight of what she'd just done crashed over her. She'd threatened an innocent man's daughter. She'd chosen Kael. She'd crossed the line. A hand touched her elbow. Kael stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "Let's go." He guided her through the crowd, out a side exit, into the cold Chicago night. The SUV waited. They climbed inside. The door closed. Silence. Then Kael said quietly, "You did well." Celine turned on him, fury and shame burning through her veins. "I threatened his daughter. You protected yourself. Exactly as I taught you. You didn't teach me anything. You manipulated me. I gave you a choice." His voice was calm, infuriatingly calm. "You chose survival. There's no shame in that. There's everything wrong with that." She was shaking now, adrenaline crashing. "I'm not like you. I can't. You already have." The truth of it hit like a physical blow. She had. She'd looked Anton in the eye and threatened someone innocent to save herself, just like Kael would have done. Celine pressed her hands against her face, trying to breathe through the panic. Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "For what it's worth, Anna Breslov doesn't exist." Celine's hands dropped. "What?" "Anton has no children, no family in America at all. Everything you said was a lie I fed you because I knew you'd hesitate if you thought you were really hurting someone." The relief was crushing, followed immediately by rage. "You manipulated me." "Yes. You made me think. I made you cross a line you were going to cross eventually anyway." Kael turned to look at her, his pale eyes reflecting the city lights. "Better to do it believing you had no choice than to wake up one day and realize you made that choice willingly." Celine wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, wanted to demand he let her out of the car and the penthouse, and this entire nightmare. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, she knew he was right. She'd made a choice tonight, not because Kyle forced her, but because when it came down to it, when it was her survival versus someone else's, she'd chosen herself. And she'd do it again. "I hate you," she whispered. Kale looked away. "I know." The SUV pulled up to the penthouse building. Celine climbed out without waiting for the driver. She made it to the elevator, through the lobby, up 60 floors, into her beautiful cage. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows and stared out at Chicago sprawling below her like a kingdom she'd never wanted to rule. Her phone buzzed, a text from the hospital. "Your grandmother's scans came back, tumor shrinking, doctors optimistic." Celine read it 3 times, then she sat down on the cold marble floor and cried until she had nothing left. Bum. The knock came an hour later. "Go away!" Celine called. The door opened anyway. Kale stood in the doorway, still in his tux, but with the bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He looked almost human like that. Almost. "I brought you something," he said. He held out a glass of amber liquid. Celine wanted to refuse, wanted to throw it in his face. Instead, she took it. The whiskey burned going down. Good. She wanted to feel something other than shame. Kale sat down beside her on the floor. Not close, but not distant either. They sat in silence, watching the city lights. "My sister was 14 when she died," Kale said finally. Celine turned to look at him. He'd never mentioned a sister. "She was sick," he continued, his voice flat, emotionless. "Cancer, like your grandmother. We couldn't afford treatment, not in Russia, not where we lived." "What happened?" "I watched her die over 6 months. Watched her waste away while I couldn't do anything." His hand tightened around his glass. "The day she died, I made a promise. I would never be powerless again. Never watch someone I cared about suffer because I didn't have money or power or control." He took a drink. "I kept that promise. Built an empire out of violence and blood and broken rules. Became everything I needed to be to make sure I'd never feel that helpless again." Celine's throat felt tight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you think you're becoming a monster." Kael finally looked at her. "You're not. You're just learning that the world doesn't care about your morals when someone you love is dying. It only cares about what you're willing to sacrifice." "That's not true." "It is. And the sooner you accept it, the sooner you stop torturing yourself over choices you were always going to make." Celine looked down at her glass. "I don't want to be like you." "Good. Stay angry. Stay guilty. That means you're still human." He stood, offering her his hand. "But stop pretending you're not already in this. You crossed the line tonight. Own it." Celine stared at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. Let him pull her to her feet. They stood there close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, see the exhaustion etched into his face. "Tomorrow," Kyle said quietly, "you have a meeting with a Ukrainian delegation. They're considering a partnership. You'll need to—" "I know what to do," Celine interrupted. Something flickered in his expression, approval maybe. "Get some sleep, Miss Vale." He turned to leave. "Kyle," he stopped. "Your sister, what was her name?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Katya." "I'm sorry." He didn't respond, just walked out, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Celine stood alone in her room and realized something terrifying. She understood him now, not the violence, not the empire, but the choice he'd made, the line he'd crossed to save someone he loved, and understanding him made everything so much worse, because it meant she could see the path ahead, see where this led, see the moment when she'd stop fighting what she was becoming and just accept it. The phone rang, her grandmother. Celine picked up, forcing brightness into her voice. "Hey, babushka, I heard about the scans. Dorogaya, you sound tired. Are you sleeping enough?" "I'm fine. I promise. Tell me how you're feeling." She sat on the edge of her bed and listened to her grandmother talk about the nurses, the food, the sunlight through her window. And she didn't tell her that the money paying for all of it was soaked in blood. Didn't tell her that her granddaughter had just threatened an innocent man to protect a criminal. Didn't tell her that with every passing day, the line between victim and accomplice was getting harder to see. She just listened and lied and wondered how many more lies she could tell before she forgot what the truth even looked like. The call ended. Celine sat in the dark. Outside her window, Chicago glittered like a promise and a threat all at once. And somewhere in the penthouse, Kael Veronin sat alone in his office, staring at a photograph of a dark-haired girl who died because he couldn't save her. The girl who'd turned him into a monster. The same way Celine was being turned into one now. One impossible choice at a time. Kết thúc phần 1, tiếp tục phần 2. The first crack appeared 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday that started with blood. Celine woke to the sound of raised voices in the penthouse's main room. She checked her phone, 4:47 a.m., and pulled on a robe before stepping into the hallway. The voices were speaking Russian, fast, angry. She recognized Kael's voice immediately. The other belonged to Dmitri, his head of security, a man who'd looked at her like she was a problem since the day she'd arrived. Can't keep pretending this is sustainable, Dmitri was saying. She's a liability. Every meeting she attends, every conversation she translates, she learns more. Eventually, she'll become leverage someone else can use against you. She's useful. She's dangerous. You know what happens when we keep loose ends around too long. Celine's blood went cold. Are you questioning my judgment? Kael's voice dropped to something that barely qualified as human, a pause. No, but I'm reminding you what happened last time you let someone get close. Celine pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. Katya was different. Katya is exactly why you shouldn't be doing this again. You're compromised, and compromised men make mistakes. Silence stretched like a blade. Then Kael spoke, each word precise as a bullet. Celine Vale stays. That's not a discussion. Then you're going to get us all killed. Footsteps. Heavy boots moving toward the door. Celine barely made it back to her room before Dmitri stormed past, his face carved from stone and fury. She sat on her bed, hands shaking, replaying the conversation in her mind. Loose ends, liability, last time you let someone get close. She'd heard enough conversations in Kael's world to know what happened to loose ends. They didn't retire to Florida. They didn't get severance packages. They disappeared. The knock on her door came 20 minutes later. I know you're awake, Kael said through the wood. Celine didn't answer. I also know you heard. Damn it. She opened the door. Kael stood there in dark slacks and an untucked white shirt, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was disheveled. He held a coffee mug in one hand. How much? He asked. Enough. He nodded slowly. Dimitri's cautious. It's his job to see threats everywhere. Am I a threat? Kael studied her face for a long moment. That depends. On what? On whether you're planning to run. Celine's laugh came out bitter. Run where? You've made it very clear what happens if I try to leave. And even if I could, my grandmother's still in treatment, still dependent on your money. So no, I'm not planning to run. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief. Something darker. Satisfaction. Good, he said quietly. Because I need you today. Big meeting. Russian oligarchs looking to move money through Chicago real estate. They're paranoid, old school, and they only trust people who remind them of home. You mean you need someone they can manipulate into thinking they're safe? I mean I need someone who can read a room and tell me when they're lying. Kael took a sip of his coffee. You're good at that. Better than you realize. Celine wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to find someone else. But she thought of her grandmother, thought of the latest scan results, thought of the experimental drug trial that was giving her weeks she wouldn't have had otherwise. When? She asked. 2 hours. Wear something elegant but not revealing. These men respect modesty. He turned to leave. Kael. He stopped. Dimitri's right, isn't he? Eventually I will become a problem you can't afford to keep around. Kael looked back at her, his pale eyes unreadable. Yes. The honesty of it hit harder than any lie could have. Then why keep me at all? Because right now you're more useful alive than dead, and I'm hoping by the time that changes, he paused. You'll have given me a reason not to. He walked away before she could ask what kind of reason he meant. Ag. The meeting took place in a private dining room at a restaurant that didn't officially exist. No sign, no website, just a door in an alley and a phone number only certain people knew. Celine sat beside Kyle at a table that probably cost more than a car. 4 Russian men sat across from them, each one radiating the kind of wealth that came from decades of very specific kinds of business. The oldest, Viktor Orlov, had cold blue eyes and hands that never stopped moving, nervous tic, or maybe just decades of paranoia that had kept him alive. "Your translator is very young," Viktor said in Russian, his gaze sliding over Celine like she was a piece of furniture. "Does she understand the nature of what we're discussing?" Kale didn't look at her. "Miss Vale understands discretion. Discretion is not the same as loyalty." Viktor leaned forward. "Tell me, girl, what makes you loyal to Mr. Voronin?" The question was a trap. Celine could feel it. She met Viktor's eyes directly and answered in flawless Russian. "He pays well, and unlike most men in his position, he doesn't pretend to be something he's not. That makes him predictable. Predictability is valuable." Viktor's eyebrow lifted. Then he laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "You hear that? She calls you predictable. I like her." The tension at the table eased slightly. They discussed real estate for the next hour. Hotels, office buildings, luxury apartments. All of it code for money laundering infrastructure that would let Viktor's money flow from Moscow to Chicago to Dubai without triggering federal oversight. Celine translated smoothly, catching nuances that would have been lost in straight English. She watched their faces. Watched the micro-expressions that gave away doubt, interest, calculation. Halfway through the 3rd course, she caught something. One of Viktor's associates, a younger man named Alexei, glanced at his phone under the table. His expression tightened for just a fraction of a second, then relaxed into neutrality. But Celine had seen it. She waited until there was a lull in conversation, then leaned close to Kyle and whispered in English. "The one on the right, Alexei. He's texting someone, got bad news." Kyle didn't react visibly, just nodded slightly. 10 minutes later, he stood and excused himself to take a call. Viktor's expression darkened. "Your employer is very rude." Celine smiled. "He's very busy. But while he's gone, perhaps you could tell me, is Alexei always this nervous during negotiations?" Viktor's eyes snapped to Alexei, who'd gone very still. "What do you mean?" Viktor's voice was soft, dangerous. "He's been checking his phone constantly, and every time he does, his left hand moves to his jacket pocket." Celine kept her tone conversational. That's where people keep guns. Or recording devices. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Alexei shot to his feet. "This is insulting." Viktor held up one hand. "Show me the phone." "Viktor, I would never—" "The phone. Now." Alexei's face went pale. His hand moved toward his pocket. 2 of Viktor's men were on him before he could reach it. They slammed him against the wall, pulled the phone from his jacket, and tossed it to Viktor. Viktor scrolled through it, his expression growing darker with each swipe. Then he looked at Celine. "You have good eyes, girl." "I pay attention, so I see." Viktor pocketed the phone and nodded to his men. They dragged Alexei toward the exit. He was shouting in Russian, pleading, swearing his loyalty. The door closed. Silence. Kyle returned moments later, as if he'd known exactly when to reappear. He glanced at the empty chair, then at Viktor. "Problem solved," Viktor said simply. Kyle sat down. "Good. Shall we continue? Shall we—" They finalized the deal over dessert. $40 million in property investments that would be used to clean money from 6 different criminal enterprises across Eastern Europe. Celine translated every word, watched the handshakes, smiled when Viktor complimented her again on her sharp eyes, and tried not to think about where Alexei had been taken, or what would happen to him in the next few hours. The drive back to the penthouse was silent. Celine stared out the window, watching Chicago slide past in blurs of light and shadow. The SUV's interior smelled like leather and the faint trace of Kyle's cologne. "You knew," she said finally. "Knew what?" "About Alexei. You knew he was compromised before we even sat down." Kale was quiet for a moment. "I suspected." "Then why let me point it out?" Because Victor needed to discover it himself. If I'd accused Alexei directly, Victor would have gotten defensive, questioned my motives. This way, he thinks his translator caught something I missed, makes me look less threatening, makes you look invaluable. Celine turned to look at him. You used me as a prop in your manipulation. Yes. What's going to happen to Alexei? Nothing you need to think about. He's going to die. It wasn't a question. Kale finally met her eyes. He was feeding information to the FBI. He put Victor's entire operation at risk. Victor doesn't forgive that. And you just watched it happen. I facilitated it happening. There's a difference. Celine felt sick. No, there isn't. You saved Victor's empire tonight. Probably saved him from a federal indictment that would have brought down a dozen other organizations, mine included. You should feel proud. I helped you murder someone. No. You helped Victor discover a traitor in his own organization. What he does with that information is his choice. Kale's voice was calm, clinical. You're not responsible for other people's violence, Miss Vale. Only your own. That's a convenient lie. It's the truth. The sooner you accept it, the easier this gets. Celine turned back to the window. Her reflection stared back at her. Perfectly styled hair, elegant dress, makeup that made her look like she belonged in Kael's world. She didn't recognize herself anymore. I want to see my grandmother tomorrow, she said quietly. Fine. I'll arrange security. Alone. No guards following me around like I'm a prisoner. You're not a prisoner. You're an asset. Assets require protection. I'm a person. Kale's laugh was soft and bitter. No. You stopped being just a person the moment you agreed to work for me. You became something more valuable and more dangerous. The sooner you understand that, the longer you'll survive. The SUV pulled up to the tower. Celine climbed out without waiting for the driver. She made it through the lobby, into the elevator, up to the penthouse. She stripped off the elegant dress, washed off the makeup, stood in the shower until the hot water ran cold. But she couldn't wash off the look on Alexei's face when he realized he'd been caught. The fear, the knowledge that he was already dead, and worst of all, the tiny, horrible part of her brain that whispered, he deserved it. He was a traitor. He put everyone at risk, the same justifications Kael would use, the same logic that made monsters sleep at night. She was starting to think like him. The hospital visit happened 2 days later. Celine's grandmother looked better than she had in months. Color in her cheeks, strength in her voice. She sat propped up in bed, knitting something pink and soft. For the baby, she explained in Russian, Nurse Marina's daughter is expecting. Celine sat beside her, holding her hand. You look good, babushka. I feel good. The doctors say the tumors are shrinking. They're talking about maybe letting me go home soon. Home. The word felt foreign. Celine's apartment, the tiny studio with the broken heater and the neighbor who played trumpet at midnight, felt like something from another lifetime. She hadn't been back in over a month. That's wonderful, she managed. Her grandmother studied her face. You look tired, Dorogaya. This new job, it's too much work? No, it's fine, just different than I expected. Different how? Celine hesitated. The people I work with, they're complicated. Complicated is a good word for dangerous. Her grandmother's voice was gentle but knowing. I'm old, Celine, not blind. You're wearing clothes that cost more than you made in 6 months at that restaurant. You have security guards in the hallway. And when you lie to me about where the money comes from, you get the same look your mother used to get when she was hiding something. Celine's throat tightened. I can't talk about it. Can't or won't? Both. Her grandmother squeezed her hand. Then just tell me one thing. Are you safe? Celine thought about Dmitri's words. Thought about Alexei being dragged from the restaurant. Thought about the way Kael looked at her sometimes, like she was valuable and dangerous in equal measure. I don't know, she whispered. Then you need to leave. Whatever money this job pays, it's not worth your life. It's worth yours. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. The treatments, the drugs, the private room, none of that happens without this job. So yes, babushka, it's worth it. Her grandmother's expression crumpled. Oh, Dorogaya, what have you done? Celine couldn't answer, just held her grandmother's hand and tried not to cry. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, her grandmother spoke. Your grandfather, he worked for bad men during the war, did things he never forgave himself for, but he did them because it meant I could eat, meant we could survive. She paused. He told me once that the hardest part wasn't doing the terrible things, it was learning to live with yourself afterward. How did he do it? He never did. Not really. The guilt ate him alive for 40 years. Her grandmother's eyes were sad. Don't let it eat you, Celine. Whatever you're doing, whatever you've become, find a way to live with it, or find a way to stop. Celine nodded, not trusting her voice. She stayed another hour. They talked about safer things, the weather, the nurses, the terrible hospital food. When visiting hours ended, Celine kissed her grandmother's forehead and whispered in Russian, I love you. I love you too. Be careful, Dorogaya. Celine walked out of the hospital room and found Kael leaning against the wall in the hallway, hands in his pockets. I thought I said alone, she said. Your security said alone. I'm not security. He pushed off the wall. How is she? Better, thanks to your blood money. You're welcome. They walked toward the elevator in silence. Inside, as the doors closed, Kael spoke. You told her the truth. I told her enough. And what did she say? Celine looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like relaxing was a luxury he couldn't afford. She said guilt will eat me alive if I let it. She's not wrong. Is that what happened to you, the guilt? Kael's expression didn't change. I don't have the luxury of guilt. I have an empire to run. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. The elevator opened onto the lobby. They walked toward the waiting SUV. I need a drink, Celine said suddenly. Kael glanced at her. It's 2 p.m. I don't care. She stopped, took a breath. I need to feel normal for 5 minutes. Can we do that? Can we go somewhere that isn't your penthouse or a criminal negotiation and just exist? Kael studied her face for a long moment. Then he said to his driver, Change of plans, Mom. The bar was a dive in a neighborhood Celine didn't recognize. Dark wood, older crowd. The kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. Kael ordered vodka. Celine ordered whiskey. They sat at the bar in silence. 2 people who didn't belong together, drinking like they were trying to forget something. Why this place? Celine asked after her second drink. I used to come here. Years ago. Before, he gestured vaguely. Everything. Before you became the Wolf King? His mouth twitched. Is that what they're calling me? It's what everyone calls you. Everyone except you. You just call me Kael. Would you prefer I called you something else? No. He took a drink. It's refreshing, actually. Most people are too afraid to use my name. Should I be afraid? Yes, but not for the reasons you think. Celine turned to look at him. What does that mean? Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dimitri was right. You're becoming a problem, not because you know too much, though you do, but because... He trailed off. Because what? Because I'm starting to trust you, and trust is dangerous in my world. Celine's heart hammered. You don't trust anyone. Exactly. Which is why what I'm feeling is a problem. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Celine should have pulled back, should have put distance between them. Instead, she asked, What are you feeling? Kael's eyes met hers, gray, cold, but underneath, something that looked almost human. I don't know yet, he said quietly, and that terrifies me. Before Celine could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire expression changed. We need to go, now. What's wrong? Someone just tried to kill Dimitri. They made it back to the tower in under 10 minutes. Kael's driver ran every red light, weaving through traffic like they were being chased. The penthouse was chaos. Dimitri sat on the couch, his shirt torn and blood-stained, a field medic wrapping his ribs. His face was a mess, split lip, black eye, blood still dripping from a cut on his forehead. 3 of Kael's men stood around him, weapons visible. What happened? Kael's voice was ice. Dmitri looked up, his expression murderous. Ambush. 3 blocks from here. Professional. They knew my route. Who? Volkov's people. Had to be. They're the only ones who'd be stupid enough to move against me directly. Kael's jaw tightened. Casualties? 2 of my men dead, 1 in critical condition. Dmitri winced as the medic tightened the bandage. They wanted me alive, tried to drag me into a van. I fought free. They wanted information. Obviously. Kael paced the room, his mind visibly racing. This is escalation. Volkov's making a move. Or someone's using Volkov as cover. Dmitri's eyes slid to Celine. Convenient timing. We bring her in. Suddenly people are targeting us. Celine's blood went cold. You didn't have to. You exist. That makes you leverage. Dmitri stood, ignoring the medic's protests. I told you she was a liability. Now 2 of my men are dead because someone thinks they can use her to get to you. That's not her fault. It's exactly her fault. Dmitri's voice rose. She's a civilian playing in a world she doesn't understand. Every meeting she attends, every conversation she translates, she becomes more valuable to our enemies. And eventually someone's going to take her just to see what she knows. Kael's expression was carved from stone. That won't happen. You can't guarantee that. Nobody can. Dmitri turned to face Kael fully. You need to decide, right now. Is she worth the risk? The room went silent. Celine felt every eye turn to her, felt the weight of the question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Kael didn't look at her, didn't move, just stood there, perfectly still, perfectly controlled. Get out, he said quietly. Dmitri blinked. What? Everyone out, now. The men exchanged glances, then they filed out one by one, the medic taking his supplies with him. Dmitri was the last to leave. He paused at the door, his expression dark. You're making a mistake. The door closed. Celine and Kael stood alone in the penthouse's massive living room, the city glittering beyond the windows. He's right, Celine said. Her voice shook. I am a liability. I always have been. You should... Don't. Kael's voice cut through her words like a blade. Don't tell me what I should do. Then what do you want me to say? Nothing. I want you to listen. He turned to face her finally. Dmitri thinks you're a weakness. He thinks caring about someone makes me vulnerable. He's probably right, but here's what he doesn't understand. He moved closer, close enough that Celine could see the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes. I've spent 10 years building an empire where I don't need anyone, where I'm completely self-sufficient, where the only person I have to worry about keeping alive is myself. His voice was low, intense. And it's made me into something barely human, something that can order men killed over dinner and sleep fine afterward. Kael, you make me feel human again, and I don't know if that's a gift or a curse, but I'm not ready to give it up yet. Celine's breath caught. She should run, should demand he let her go, should tell him this was insane and dangerous and going to get both of them killed. Instead, she heard herself say, I don't want to be the reason you get hurt. You won't be. But you might be the reason I finally remember what I'm fighting for. His hand lifted, almost touching her face, then dropped. Go to your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. What are you going to do? What I should have done weeks ago. Find out who's targeting my people and remind everyone in this city why they should be afraid of me. The cold certainty in his voice sent shivers down her spine. Kael, be careful. Something flickered in his expression, almost a smile. Careful is for people who have something to lose. He walked past her, grabbed his jacket, and was gone. Selena stood alone in the penthouse and realized something terrifying. She was afraid for him. Not afraid of him. For him, which meant she'd crossed another line she hadn't even known existed. The call came at 3 a.m. Celine had been lying awake, staring at her ceiling when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then something made her pick up. Hello? Celine Vale. The voice was male, American, calm. I think we should talk. Who is this? Someone who knows what you've gotten yourself into. Someone who can help. Celine sat up, her heart racing. How did you get this number? I'm a federal prosecutor, Miss Vale. Getting phone numbers is the easy part. The hard part is getting people to listen before it's too late. Her blood went cold. I don't know what you think. I think you're an intelligent woman who's been coerced into working for Kyle Voronin. I think you're scared. I think you want out, but don't know how. He paused. And I think if you stay much longer, you're going to end up dead or in prison. I can't talk to you. You can. And if you're smart, you will. Because we're building a case against Voronin. Multiple federal agencies. We have wiretaps, surveillance, financial records. It's just a matter of time before we have enough to bring him down. Celine's hand shook on the phone. Then why call me? Because when we move against him, anyone in his inner circle gets caught in the net. That includes translators who attended meetings with known criminals and helped facilitate illegal business deals. His voice softened. But it doesn't have to include you. If you cooperate, if you help us understand his operation from the inside. You want me to inform. I want to offer you a way out before it's too late. Witness protection. New identity. We'll relocate your grandmother. Make sure she gets the care she needs. You'll be safe. It was everything she should want. Freedom. Safety. A chance to walk away from this nightmare with her life intact. But all she could think about was Kyle standing in the bar, admitting he was starting to trust her, admitting she made him feel human. I need to think about it, she whispered. You have 48 hours. After that, we move forward with or without you. And if you're still inside Voronin's organization when we execute the warrants, he let the threat hang. Think carefully, Miss Vale. Think about what kind of life you want. The line went dead. Celine sat in the dark, phone in hand, mind racing. She could run, could take the deal, could disappear into witness protection and never look back. But that would mean leaving Kyle to face federal charges alone, would mean betraying the man who'd saved her grandmother's life, the man who'd admitted she made him feel human, the man she was starting to... No, she couldn't be falling for him. He was a criminal, a killer, a man who'd built an empire on violence and blood. But he was also the only person who'd ever looked at her like she mattered, like she was more than just a struggling student drowning in debt, like she was powerful. Celine pressed her hands against her face and tried to breathe through the panic. She had 48 hours to decide, 48 hours to choose between freedom and loyalty, between the life she used to want and the life she was becoming, between the woman she'd been and the woman Kyle was turning her into. The bedroom door opened. Kale stood in the doorway, his shirt torn, blood on his knuckles. He looked exhausted, dangerous. You're awake, he said. Couldn't sleep. He moved into the room, sitting on the edge of her bed like he had every right to be there. Up close, she could see the bruise forming on his jaw, fresh blood on his collar. What happened? She asked. Found the people responsible for the attack on Dmitri, convinced them to share information about who hired them. Convinced? Persuaded. His smile was thin. Volkov's behind it. He's making a play to take over my territory. The attack on Dmitri was just the opening move. What are you going to do? End it, quickly, before more of my people die. He looked at her, his pale eyes reflecting the city lights from her window. But I wanted to check on you first. Why? Because Dmitri's right. You're in danger. And I don't... He paused, seeming to search for words. I don't want anything to happen to you. Celine's throat tightened. The prosecutor called me. Federal prosecutor. He knows I've been attending meetings with you. He offered me a deal. She expected anger, expected threats. Instead, Kyle just nodded slowly. Of course he did. They've probably been watching me for months, maybe longer. He said I have 48 hours to decide. Cooperate or get arrested when they move against you. Are you going to take it? The question hung between them, heavy with consequences. Celine looked at him, this man who'd kidnapped her into his world, who'd manipulated her into crossing lines she'd never imagined crossing, who'd made her complicit in things that would haunt her forever. This man who'd also saved her grandmother's life, who'd protected her, who'd looked at her like she mattered. I don't know, she whispered. Kale reached out, his blood-stained hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. Then let me make it easier. If you take the deal, I won't stop you, won't come after you, won't hurt your grandmother. You'll be free. Tears burned behind Celine's eyes. Just like that? Just like that? Why? Because despite everything Dmitri thinks, despite everything I've built my life on, he paused, his thumb brushing her cheek. I don't want to be the reason you spend the rest of your life in a cage, even if that cage is my penthouse. Celine's breath caught. This was her chance, her way out. All she had to do was say yes, take the deal, walk away. But she couldn't make the words come, because somewhere between the fear and the guilt and the impossible choices, something had shifted. She didn't want to run anymore. She wanted to stay, wanted to see where this dangerous, impossible connection between them led, even if it destroyed them both. I'm not taking the deal, she heard herself say. Kale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, relief, maybe, or fear. You should, he said quietly. I know. Then why? Celine kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about consequences or meanings or what it would mean for everything that came after. She just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, tasting blood and whiskey and something darker she couldn't name. For half a second, Kale went perfectly still. Then he kissed her back. It wasn't gentle, wasn't soft or sweet, or any of the things first kisses were supposed to be. It was desperate, hungry, like two people drowning and finding air in each other. His hand tangled in her hair. Her fingers dug into his torn shirt. The kiss deepened, and Celine felt something inside her crack wide open, all the fear and guilt and confusion burning away into something simpler, want, need, choice. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kyle pressed his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he whispered. I know. You're going to regret it. Probably. I can't protect you from what's coming. I'm not asking you to. Kale pulled back, his eyes searching her face. What are you asking for? Celine took a shaky breath. I'm asking you to stop treating me like I'm fragile. Stop giving me outs and escapes and ways to leave. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Even though it's insane, even though it's going to end badly, I'm choosing it anyway. Something broke in Kale's expression, something that looked like the last wall finally crumbling. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He kissed her again. Slower this time, deeper. And Celine felt the last threads connecting her to her old life snap. There was no going back now, no return to normal, no pretending she was just a victim caught in circumstances beyond her control. She'd made her choice, chosen the monster, chosen the darkness, chosen him. When Kyle finally left her room hours later, the sun was rising over Lake Michigan, painting the city in shades of gold and blood. Celine sat by her window and watched it, her lips still burning from his kisses, her body still aching from his touch. She'd crossed the point of no return, and she had no idea if she'd just saved herself or damned them both. The call from the hospital came at dawn. Celine was still in bed, Kyle's arm draped across her waist, when her phone shattered the silence with its shrill ring. She grabbed it, heart already racing with the kind of dread that comes from knowing bad news before you hear it. Miss Vale? The nurse's voice was strained, professional but cracking at the edges. Your grandmother had a seizure an hour ago. You need to come now. The phone slipped from Celine's fingers. Kale was already moving, pulling on clothes, barking orders into his own phone for the car to be ready. They made it to Northwestern Memorial in 12 minutes, Kyle's driver running every light, the city still half asleep around them. Celine's grandmother looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped their mechanical rhythms. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. A doctor approached, older, gray-haired, the kind of tired that came from too many dying patients and not enough miracles. The seizure was a side effect of the immunotherapy, he explained gently. Her body can't handle the treatment anymore. We've had to stop it. Celine felt the floor tilt. But it was working. The tumors were shrinking. They were. But the treatment is too aggressive for her weakened state. If we continue, it will kill her faster than the cancer. So what do we do? The doctor's expression said everything. We make her comfortable, hospice care, pain management. She has maybe 3 weeks, a month if we're lucky. The words hit like bullets. 3 weeks, a month, all that money, all those compromises, all those lines she'd crossed, for 3 more weeks. Celine sank into the chair beside her grandmother's bed and took her hand. It felt fragile as paper, cold. "I'm sorry," she whispered in Russian. "I'm so sorry." Her grandmother's eyes fluttered open, cloudy, confused, but they found Celine's face and cleared slightly. "Dorogaya," she breathed. "You came." "Of course I came." Her grandmother's gaze drifted past Celine to where Kael stood in the doorway, silent and watchful. Something flickered in her expression. Understanding, maybe. Or just sadness. "He's the one," she said in Russian. "The dangerous job." It wasn't a question. Celine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Does he care for you?" Celine glanced back at Kael. He met her eyes across the room, his expression unreadable, but his presence solid. Certain. "I think so," she whispered. "Then maybe—" Her grandmother's grip tightened weakly. "Maybe it was worth it." "It wasn't. None of this was worth losing you." "Oh, my sweet girl, you were losing me anyway. At least this way." She smiled faintly. "At least this way I got to see you become strong. Dangerous, maybe, but strong." The machines beeped. Nurses moved in and out. The morning light crept across sterile floors. Celine stayed until her grandmother fell back asleep, then let Kael guide her into the hallway. "I need to arrange for round-the-clock hospice care," he said quietly. "Private room. The best pain management available. She won't suffer." Celine nodded numbly. "And you need to decide what you're going to do about the prosecutor's deadline. It expires tonight." She'd forgotten. In the chaos of the hospital and her grandmother's seizure, she'd completely forgotten about the federal investigation closing in around them. "I already told you," she said. "I'm not taking the deal." "Celine, I chose you. I chose this. That hasn't changed." Kael studied her face for a long moment. "You chose this when you thought we had time, when you thought your grandmother would survive, but she's not going to, and when she's gone, you'll have nothing tying you to this life, nothing except me." "Maybe that's enough." "It's not. It won't be." His voice was hard, final. "When the grief hits, and it will, you'll look at me and see every compromise you made, every line you crossed, every piece of yourself you sold to keep her alive for a few extra weeks. And you'll hate me for it." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because I've seen it before, like—" His jaw tightened. "My sister. The people I destroyed trying to save her. The empire I built on their bones. And in the end, she died anyway. And I had to live with what I'd become." Celine reached for his hand. He pulled away. "Go back to the penthouse," he said. "I'll handle the arrangements here. You need rest." "Kael, that's not a request." He turned and walked away, leaving Celine alone in the fluorescent hallway with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines keeping people alive who were already dying. The penthouse felt like a tomb. Celine stood in the living room, staring out at the city, and tried to remember what her life had been like before Kael, before the private meetings and the blood money and the weight of choices that felt like drowning. She couldn't. That version of herself was gone. Dead. Buried under weeks of compromise and survival. The door opened behind her. "You should eat something." Dimitri's voice, cold as always. Celine turned. Kael's head of security stood in the doorway, his ribs still wrapped from the attack, his face still marked with bruises. "I'm not hungry. I don't care. You eat or you collapse. Kael doesn't need another problem right now." Celine's hands clenched into fists. "I'm not a problem. You're exactly a problem." Dimitri moved into the room, his presence filling the space like a threat. "Your grandmother is dying. The feds are circling, and Kael is compromised because he cares about you. That makes you the biggest problem we have." "Then maybe he should let me go." "He won't. Because despite everything I've told him, despite every logical reason to cut you loose, he's convinced you're worth the risk." Dimitri's expression was carved from ice, So now it's my job to make sure you don't get him killed. I would never. You already did. The attack on me? That was a message. Volkov knows about you. Knows Kyle keeps you close, knows you're valuable. He stepped closer. And eventually someone's going to try to take you, use you as leverage, or worse. Celine's pulse hammered. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you take the prosecutor's deal. Disappear. Let Kale focus on the war that's coming instead of worrying about keeping you safe. He told me to make my own choice. He's lying to himself. And to you. Because the truth is, as long as you're here, he's vulnerable. And vulnerable men don't survive in our world. The words hit like a slap. Because they were true. Every word. I'm not leaving, Celine said quietly. Then you're more selfish than I thought. Or maybe I'm exactly what Kale needs. Someone who stays instead of running. Someone who fights. Dmitri laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You don't know how to fight. You're a translator playing at being dangerous. And when the real violence comes, when Volkov moves against us with everything he has, you'll break. They all do. All. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The prosecutor's deadline is in 6 hours. If you care about Kyle at all, you'll use them to disappear. The door closed. Celine stood alone in the massive penthouse and tried to breathe through the panic clawing at her chest. Maybe Dmitri was right. Maybe staying was selfish. Maybe the kindest thing she could do was walk away before she became the weakness that got Kale killed. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. The prosecutor. She stared at it for a long moment, then answered. I'm listening, she said. The meeting happened in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the federal building. Celine sat in a back corner booth, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She felt ridiculous, exposed, like everyone in the room could see exactly what she was, a traitor considering betrayal. The man who slid into the seat across from her was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, sharp suit, tired eyes. He set down 2 coffees and pushed one toward her. Ethan Mercer, he said. Thanks for coming. Celine didn't touch the coffee. You said you were a prosecutor. I am. Assistant U.S. Attorney, Organized Crime Division. But I'm also... He paused. I used to date someone who got involved with the wrong people, watched her get pulled deeper and deeper until she couldn't see a way out. By the time I convinced her to leave, it was too late. She testified against them. They killed her 3 days before the trial. Celine's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just be smart. Smarter than she was. Ethan leaned forward. We have enough to arrest Voronin. Multiple counts of money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder. But we want the whole network, his associates, his financial infrastructure, his connections to the Russian syndicates. That's where you come in. You want me to wear a wire? We want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Attending meetings, translating, recording everything. Give us 2 weeks, maybe 3, and we'll have enough to dismantle his entire operation. And then? And then we pull you out. New identity, relocation. Your grandmother gets moved to a facility under federal protection. You disappear. Start over. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. What happens to Kyle? Ethan's expression hardened. He goes to prison for the rest of his life, which is exactly what he deserves. You don't know him. I know what he is. I know the body count. I know the lives he's destroyed. Ethan pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. These are crime scene photos. People Voronin had killed. Some of them were witnesses preparing to testify. Some were rivals. Some were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Celine didn't want to look, but she forced herself to open the folder. The images hit like physical blows. Blood. So much blood. Bodies twisted in ways bodies shouldn't twist. Faces frozen in final expressions of terror. And in the margins, notes, dates, locations, connections to Kyle's organization. He did this, Ethan said quietly. Maybe not personally, but he gave the orders, signed off on it, profited from it. This is who you're protecting. Celine's hand shook as she closed the folder. I know what he is. Then why are you still there? Because he makes me feel powerful. Because he looks at me like I matter. Because somewhere between the fear and the guilt, I started to... She couldn't finish the thought. I don't know, she whispered. Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Then let me make it easy. You have two choices. Help us put him away and walk away clean, or stay loyal to a man who's going to drag you down with him when we move. There's no third option. Celine pulled her hand back. How long do I have? The deadline was tonight, but I'm giving you an extension, 72 hours. After that, we execute the warrants with or without your cooperation. And if you're still inside his organization when we do, he let the threat hang. Make the right choice, Celine. Don't die for a man who wouldn't do the same for you. He stood, leaving the folder on the table. Celine sat alone in the coffee shop, staring at the images of people Kael had killed, and tried to figure out who she'd become. She made it back to the penthouse just as the sun was setting. Kael was in his office, on the phone, speaking rapid Russian. He glanced up when she entered, his expression tight with stress. "I'll call you back," he said, then hung up. "Where were you?" "Walking, thinking. With federal agents?" Celine's blood went cold. "How did you—" "I have people watching you. For your protection. They reported you met with Ethan Mercer." Kael's voice was dangerously calm. "The same prosecutor who's been building a case against me for the past year." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" He stood, moving around the desk toward her. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're deciding whether to betray me." "I'm deciding whether I want to spend the rest of my life in prison for crimes I didn't commit." The words exploded out of her. "He showed me photos, Kael. Bodies. People you had killed. He told me I have 72 hours to cooperate or go down with you when they execute the warrants. And you're considering it." "Of course I'm considering it. My grandmother is dying. You just told me this morning that I'll hate you when she's gone. Dmitri thinks I'm a liability. The feds think I'm complicit. And I don't even know who I am anymore." Her voice cracked. "So yes, I'm considering taking the deal and disappearing before any of this destroys me completely." Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay." Celine blinked. "What?" "Take the deal. Testify. Save yourself." His expression was unreadable. "I meant what I said. I won't stop you." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Celine felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You're not going to fight for me? Not going to tell me why I should stay?" "No. Because Dmitri's right. You are a liability. And you deserve better than spending your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when my past is going to catch up with us." He moved closer, his hand cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. "So go. Take the deal. Disappear. Live whatever life you were supposed to have before I dragged you into mine." "And what about you?" "I'll survive. I always do." Celine searched his face, looking for cracks in the mask, looking for any sign that he was lying, that he wanted her to stay. But Kael was too good at hiding. "I haven't decided yet," she whispered. "Then decide fast. Because in 72 hours, neither of us will have a choice anymore." He kissed her forehead, soft, final, then stepped back. "There's a car waiting downstairs. It'll take you wherever you want to go. Hospital, airport, federal building, your choice." He turned away, moving back to his desk like she'd already left. Dismissed. Celine stood there for a moment, torn between screaming and crying and demanding he tell her what he really wanted. But she'd learned enough about Kael to know he'd already said everything he was going to say. So she walked out, took the elevator down, got in the waiting car, and told the driver to take her to the hospital. Her grandmother was awake when Celine arrived, propped up in bed, looking more alert than she had that morning. "You look terrible," she said in Russian. Celine laughed despite the tears still wet on her face. "Thanks, babushka. Sit. Tell me what's wrong." So Celine did. She told her everything, about Kael, about the meetings with criminals, about the blood money and the federal investigation and the impossible choice she was facing. Her grandmother listened without interrupting, her expression growing sadder with every word. When Celine finished, her grandmother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you love him?" The question caught Celine off guard. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I just love feeling powerful, feeling like I matter. Those can be the same thing, Dorogaya, especially for women who've spent their whole lives feeling powerless." Her grandmother squeezed her hand weakly. But love built on power is dangerous because power shifts, changes, and when it does, all you're left with is the person underneath. The question is, do you like who he is when the power is stripped away? Celine thought about Kyle standing in the bar, admitting he was terrified of what he felt. Thought about him sitting on her bedroom floor, telling her about Katya. Thought about the exhaustion in his eyes and the way he touched her like she was something precious and breakable. I think so, she whispered, but I'm also terrified of him, of what he's capable of what he's turning me into. Then maybe the question isn't whether you love him. Maybe the question is whether you can live with who you become if you stay. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, Chicago sprawled in the darkness, a million lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to track. What would you do? Celine asked. Her grandmother smiled sadly. I'm an old woman dying of cancer. My choices are different than yours. But if you're asking what I think, she paused. I think you should do whatever lets you look at yourself in the mirror afterward, even if it's the hard choice, even if it hurts. Both choices hurt. Then pick the hurt you can live with. Celine stayed until her grandmother fell asleep, then walked out into the hospital hallway and called Ethan. I need to talk to you, she said when he answered. Not on the phone, in person. When? Now. They met in a parking garage 10 blocks from the hospital. Ethan was waiting by his car, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. "You're ready to make a decision," he said. It wasn't a question. "I need to know something first. If I cooperate, if I wear a wire and help you build your case, what happens to the people in Kyle's organization who aren't criminals? The drivers, the office staff, the people who just work for him because it pays better than minimum wage?" Ethan frowned. "We're not interested in low-level employees. We want the people giving orders, making decisions, profiting from criminal activity. And Kyle? Kyle goes away for life, no question." Celine took a deep breath. "And if I don't cooperate? If I refuse to testify? Then we move forward with what we have. Arrest him based on surveillance and financial records. It'll be a weaker case, but we'll still get him. The difference is, without your testimony, we might miss people. The network stays partially intact, and you'll be arrested as an accomplice. How long would I serve? Conspiracy to commit money laundering? Probably 5 to 7 years. Maybe more, depending on what we can prove you knew." 5 to 7 years. Her grandmother would be dead in weeks. Her entire life destroyed. For what? Loyalty to a man who told her to leave? Protection of a criminal empire built on blood? It made no sense. And yet, "I can't do it," Celine heard herself say. "I can't wear a wire, can't testify, can't help you destroy him." Ethan's expression hardened. "Then you're making a mistake." "I know. You'll go to prison." "I know that too." "Why?" The word came out frustrated, angry. "Why protect a man who wouldn't do the same for you?" "Because maybe he would, or maybe he wouldn't. But either way, I need to be able to live with myself afterward. And I can't do that if I betray him." Celine met his eyes. "I crossed too many lines to save my grandmother, compromised too much of myself. If I cross this one too, if I become an informant, there won't be anything left of who I was. And I'm not ready to lose that yet." Ethan shook his head. "You're going to regret this." "Probably, but it'll be my regret, my choice." She turned to walk away. "Celine." She stopped. "The warrants execute in 60 hours. If you're still in that penthouse when we come through the door, there's nothing I can do to help you." "I understand." She walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the parking garage, and felt something inside her settle. She'd made her choice, for better or worse. Now she just had to live with it. The penthouse was dark when she returned. Celine let herself in quietly, expecting to find Kyle in his office or asleep in his room. Instead, she found him sitting in the living room, lights off, staring out at the city. A half-empty bottle of vodka sat on the table beside him. "You came back," he said without turning around. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you'd be smarter than that." Celine moved into the room, sitting on the couch beside him, close but not touching. "I met with the prosecutor again. He gave me one more chance to cooperate." And I told him no. Kale turned to look at her finally. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. Why? Because I'd rather go to prison for crimes I actually committed than betray someone I care about to save myself. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Probably. Celine reached for the vodka bottle, took a sip, felt it burn down her throat. But it's my choice, and I'm making it. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "They're executing warrants in 60 hours. I know. Which means we have 60 hours to either run or prepare for war. Which one are you choosing?" His smile was sharp, dangerous. "I don't run. Then I guess we're preparing for war." Kale studied her face in the darkness, the city lights reflecting in his pale eyes. "You understand what that means? The violence that's coming? The people who are going to die?" "I understand." "And you're still staying." "I'm still staying." Something cracked in Kale's expression, the mask he wore so carefully slipping just enough to show the man underneath. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like he was trying to hold together something that was breaking apart. "You're going to hate me," he whispered against her hair. "When this is over, when you see what I have to do to survive, you're going to look at me and see a monster. Maybe. Or maybe I'll look at you and see someone fighting as hard as I am to stay alive." Kale's laugh was broken. "That's the same thing." They sat in the darkness, holding each other, while the city glittered below them and the clock ticked down toward whatever was coming. 59 hours. 58. 57. The call came at dawn. Again. But this time it wasn't the hospital, it was Dmitri, and he sounded terrified. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Irina Volkov just arrived in Chicago." Kale went perfectly still. "Irina?" "Victor's daughter, the one who runs his entire North American operation. She's at the Drake. Called a meeting with all the major players. Everyone who has a stake in taking you down." "When?" "Tonight, 8 p.m., private ballroom." Kale's jaw tightened. "She's forming a coalition." "Worse. She's offering them pieces of your territory if they help her take you out. Real estate, shipping routes, political connections, everything you've built. She's carving it up like you're already dead." Celine felt ice flood her veins. "What are you going to do?" Kale stood, his expression shifting into something cold and calculating. "I'm going to that meeting." "That's suicide," Dmitri said through the phone. "She'll have security everywhere. You won't make it out alive." "Then I'll die making sure she doesn't either." Kale's voice was flat. Final. "Get me a list of everyone who's attending. I want to know every person who's betraying me before I walk into that room." He hung up. Celine stood. "You can't seriously be considering—" "I'm not considering, I'm doing." Kale moved toward his office. "Irina's been planning this for months, maybe years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The federal investigation gave her the excuse. My attachment to you gave her the target. She's been playing me from the beginning." "How?" Kale stopped, turned to look at her. And for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. The attack on Dmitri, the leak about you to the feds, the timing of everything. His voice was quiet, deadly. "She didn't just hire Alexei to spy on Victor. She hired him to spy on me. Through you." Celine's blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "You said Alexei was checking his phone during the meeting with Victor, getting bad news. What if the bad news was that you'd spotted him? What if he was reporting to Irina the whole time, and when you outed him, she had to cut him loose? But Victor killed him. Victor thought he killed him. What if Irina got to him first? Extracted everything he knew about my operation, about my weaknesses, about you." Kale's hands clenched into fists. "She's been using you as bait, drawing me out, making me vulnerable, and I walked right into it." Celine felt like the floor was tilting. "You think this is my fault?" "No. I think this is my fault for caring about you, for letting you become something Irina could use against me." He moved toward her, his expression torn between fury and desperation. "Which is why you need to leave. Right now. Before she realizes you're still valuable." "I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice." The windows exploded inward. Glass shattered across the living room in a spray of glittering shards. Celine screamed, throwing her arms up to protect her face. Kael tackled her to the ground, covering her body with his as bullets tore through the space where they'd been standing seconds before. The gunfire came from the building across the street. Sniper, professional. "Stay down," Kael shouted, dragging her behind the couch. More gunfire. The marble walls around them erupted in dust and fragments. Then, silence. Kael's phone rang. He answered it, his face carved from stone. "This is Irina," a woman's voice said. Celine could hear it through the speaker. Calm, almost amused. "Just a warning shot, to show you I can reach you anywhere, even in your precious glass tower." "What do you want?" Kael's voice was ice. "I want you to come to the meeting tonight, alone, unarmed, and I want you to bring your little translator with you." Celine's breath caught. "Why?" "Because she's the price of your survival. You hand her over, publicly, in front of everyone who's considering joining my coalition. You admit she was a federal informant working against you. You execute her yourself, and maybe, I let you walk out of that room alive." The words hit like physical blows. Kael's expression didn't change. "And if I refuse, then I kill everyone you care about, starting with Dmitri, then your remaining security, then every low-level employee in your organization, then the nurses taking care of Celine's dying grandmother." Irina's voice hardened. "And then I'll come for you, slowly, painfully, and I'll make sure you watch everything you built burn to ash before I finally let you die." The line went dead. Kael lowered the phone slowly. Celine stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "You're not seriously considering—" "I'm considering every option." Kael's voice was flat, empty. "Because right now, Irina holds every card. She has the coalition, the resources, the element of surprise, and she knows exactly how to hurt me. By making you kill me. By making me choose between you and everyone else I'm responsible for. She knows I can't let Dmitri die. Can't let my people be slaughtered. Can't let your grandmother suffer." His eyes met hers. "So she's betting I'll sacrifice you to save them. Will you?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Kael didn't answer, and in that silence, Celine felt something inside her shatter. She'd chosen him, refused the federal deal, stayed when she could have run, and now he was considering murdering her to save himself. "Get out," she whispered. "Celine, get out!" The words came out as a scream. "You want to know if I'll hate you when this is over? I already do, because the man I thought I was choosing, the man who told me I made him human, that man wouldn't even consider this. But you are. You're actually weighing my life against your empire like it's a business decision. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You either value me or you don't. You either care about me or you care about your survival more." Tears streamed down her face. "And we both know which one you're choosing." Kael's expression cracked. "I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice. You taught me that." She stood, glass crunching under her feet, and walked toward her bedroom. "Where are you going?" "To pack. To leave. To do what I should have done weeks ago before I was stupid enough to fall for a man who was always going to choose his empire over me." "Celine, wait." But she slammed the bedroom door in his face, locked it, sank to the floor with her back against the wood, and finally let herself break. Because she'd been right all along. You couldn't trust monsters, even the ones who made you feel like you mattered, even the ones who looked at you like you were human. In the end, they always chose survival, and she'd been a fool to think Kael would be any different. Outside her door, she heard him call her name, heard the desperation in his voice, but she didn't answer, just sat in the darkness and listened to her heart shatter into pieces too small to ever put back together. But Celine didn't pack. She sat on the floor of her bedroom for 3 hours, back against the locked door, listening to Kael pace outside. Listening to him make phone calls in Russian, his voice getting harder and colder with each conversation. Listening to the penthouse fill with the sounds of preparation, boots on marble, weapons being loaded, low urgent voices planning for war. When the pacing finally stopped, when silence settled like dust, she pulled herself up and moved to the window. The city sprawled below, indifferent to the violence brewing inside this glass tower. People living their normal lives, going to work, kissing their families, sleeping without nightmares about men who measured your worth in terms of survival versus sacrifice. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your grandmother passed peacefully an hour ago. The nurses said she wasn't in pain. I'm sorry for your loss. Ethan. The phone slipped from Celine's fingers. She didn't cry. Couldn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere between Kyle silence and the shattered windows, and the realization that she'd sold pieces of her soul for 3 extra weeks. 3 weeks that ended with her grandmother dying while Celine was locked in a bedroom, hiding from the monster she'd chosen. A knock on the door, soft, almost gentle. Celine, Dimitri's voice. I know you don't want to talk to him, but you need to hear this. She didn't answer. Your grandmother died an hour ago. Kyle made sure she had morphine, made sure she wasn't alone. The hospice nurse stayed with her until the end. Celine pressed her forehead against the glass. Cold, solid, real. He's going to the meeting tonight, Dimitri continued. He's going to face Irina, and he wanted me to tell you something. Silence. He said to tell you he's sorry for everything, for dragging you into this, for making you think he'd ever consider... Dimitri's voice roughened. He said if you're still here when he gets back, he'll know you forgive him, and if you're not, he'll understand. Footsteps retreating. Celine turned from the window and stared at the locked door. Kyle wasn't going to kill her, wasn't going to hand her over to Irina. He was going to die instead. Walk into that meeting alone and unarmed and let Irina's coalition tear him apart rather than sacrifice her. The realization hit like a freight train. She unlocked the door and ran. Kyle stood in the living room, dressed in a dark suit that made him look like he was attending a funeral. His funeral, maybe. Dimitri and 4 other men surrounded him, all armed, all wearing expressions that said they knew this was suicide. You're not going alone, Celine said from the doorway. Every head turned. Kyle's expression was unreadable. Go back to your room. No. Celine. My grandmother died an hour ago. Her voice cracked but held. Which means I have nothing left tying me to anything except you. So if you're walking into that meeting to die, I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You don't get to decide anymore. You lost that right when you spent 3 hours pretending you were considering killing me instead of just telling me you'd already decided to die in my place. Kale's jaw tightened. I wasn't pretending. I was trying to figure out if there was any other way. And? There isn't. Irina has every advantage. The only play I have left is to show up and prove I'm not afraid of her. Maybe that buys enough respect from the others in the room that they hesitate before joining her coalition. Maybe it doesn't. Either way, you're not going to be there to watch. Why? Because you care about me? Celine moved closer, her voice rising. Because you want to protect me? Or because you can't stand the thought of me seeing what you really are when you're cornered? The words hit their target. Kale flinched. Both, he said quietly. Then let me see it. Let me see all of it. Because I chose you, Kyle, not the version of you that's controlled and calculated and 3 steps ahead. I chose the man who's terrified and desperate and willing to die rather than hurt someone he cares about. So let me stand beside you when it happens. You'll get killed. Then I'll die with you instead of spending the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference. Dimitri made a sound that might have been a laugh or a curse. She's as crazy as you are. Kyle looked at Celine for a long moment. She watched the war play out behind his eyes, the calculation versus the emotion, the logic versus the desperate human need to not die alone. Fine, he said finally, but you do exactly what I say, when I say, no arguments. Agreed. And if it looks like we're not getting out of that room alive, you run. You don't look back, you don't try to help, you just run. No? Celine, I said I'd do what you say. I didn't say I'd run. She met his eyes. We survive this together, or we don't survive at all. Those are my terms. Something cracked in Kyle's expression. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her, hard and desperate, and like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. You're going to get us both killed, he whispered. Probably. But at least we'll die for something that matters. And what's that? Each other. Basi. The Drake Hotel glittered like a palace built on old money and older secrets. Celine climbed out of the SUV, her legs shaking beneath a black dress Kael's people had provided. It was elegant, expensive, armor disguised as fashion. Kael stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back. Possessive, protective, a statement to anyone watching. "Last chance to change your mind," he murmured. "Not a chance." They walked through the marble lobby, past tourists and business travelers who had no idea they were walking past a man heading to his own execution. The elevators carried them to the ballroom level. Classical music drifted from behind closed doors. Two men in suits stood guard outside the private ballroom. Russians. Kael knew them by sight. He tensed slightly. "Mr. Voronin," one said in heavily accented English. "Miss Volkov is waiting. Your weapons, please." Kael handed over his gun without argument. Let them pat him down. Found nothing because there was nothing to find. They turned to Celine. "She's unarmed," Kael said. "We check anyway." The guard's hands moved over her dress with professional efficiency. Found the small blade she'd taped to her inner thigh. Kael's eyes widened fractionally. He hadn't known. The guard held up the blade. "Nice try." He pocketed it and opened the door. The ballroom was smaller than Celine expected. Intimate. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by 15 chairs. 12 were occupied. Viktor Orlov sat near the head, his expression unreadable. Beside him were faces Celine recognized from other meetings: oligarchs, cartel representatives, corrupt businessmen who'd built fortunes on blood and silence. And at the head of the table sat a woman who could only be Irina Volkov. She was beautiful in the way weapons were beautiful, sharp, cold, perfectly designed for maximum damage. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers, eyes that assessed everything and gave away nothing. She smiled when she saw Kael. "The Wolf King arrives." How punctual. Her English was flawless, barely touched by accent. "And you brought your pet translator. How sentimental." Kael's hand tightened on Celine's back. A warning. "You called a meeting," he said calmly. "I'm here. Say what you need to say." "Oh, this isn't about what I need to say. This is about what you need to hear." Irina gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit, both of you." They sat. The weight of 12 hostile gazes pressed down like physical force. Irina poured herself vodka from a crystal decanter. "Gentlemen, we're here tonight because Mr. Voronin has become a liability. The federal investigation into his operations threatens all of us. His territory, his resources, his political connections, all of it will be seized when the warrants execute, which means we have approximately," she glanced at her watch, "42 hours to redistribute his assets before the government does it for us." "You can't redistribute what you don't own," Kael said quietly. "Can I? Let's take inventory. Victor, you've already agreed to take over the Southside real estate operations, correct?" Victor wouldn't meet Kael's eyes. The offer was generous. Betrayal number 1. "And Carlos?" Irina nodded to a cartel representative. "The shipping routes through the ports. You'll handle those?" Carlos shifted uncomfortably. The terms were acceptable. Betrayal number 2. Irina smiled. "You see, Kael, your empire is already carved up. All that's left is for you to accept reality. You're finished." Kael's expression didn't change. "And if I refuse to accept it, then I demonstrate to everyone in this room why resistance is pointless." Irina gestured, and 2 guards dragged someone through a side door. Celine's breath caught. It was Dmitri. Battered. Bloody. Barely conscious. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. "We picked him up an hour ago," Irina said conversationally. "He was remarkably difficult to capture. Killed 3 of my men before we subdued him. Very loyal. Very dedicated." Kael went utterly still. The kind of stillness that came before violence. "Let him go." "No. Because he represents something important. A lesson everyone here needs to learn." Irina stood, pulling a handgun from her jacket. "The price of loyalty to a dying king." She pressed the barrel to Dmitri's temple. Kael's hands clenched on the table. "Don't. Give me one reason why not. Because if you kill him, I'll spend every resource I have left making sure you die screaming." Irina laughed. "You have no resources left, Kael. No leverage, no power. Just a federal indictment and a girl you're too weak to sacrifice." She cocked the hammer. "Any last words for your loyal dog?" Dmitri lifted his head, blood streaming from his mouth. His eyes found Kael's. "It was worth it," he said in Russian. "Serving you, all of it." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Dmitri's body slumped forward. Celine screamed, couldn't help it, the sound tearing from her throat. Kael didn't make a sound, but something in his expression shifted. The last thread of humanity burning away into something cold and ancient and absolutely murderous. "You just made a mistake," he said quietly. Irina holstered her gun. "Did I? Because from where I'm standing, I just eliminated your most trusted advisor and nobody in this room lifted a finger to stop me. That's called power, Kael. Real power. Not the illusion you've been operating on." She moved around the table, stopping behind Celine's chair. "Now, let's discuss your translator, the federal informant you've been protecting." Celine's blood turned to ice. "She's not an informant," Kael said. "No? Then why did she meet with Assistant U.S. Attorney Ethan Mercer 3 times in the past week? Why did she visit the federal building yesterday? Why did she refuse to answer when I had my people question her grandmother's nurses about her activities?" The lies were perfectly constructed, damning, impossible to disprove. Every man at the table turned to look at Celine with new suspicion. "She met with Mercer because he threatened her," Kael said. "Tried to turn her. She refused. Can you prove that?" "Can you prove otherwise?" Irina smiled. "I don't have to prove anything. I just have to create doubt. And doubt—" She pulled Celine up from her chair by her hair, yanking her head back. "Is all it takes to justify this." The knife appeared from nowhere. Irina pressed it to Celine's throat. Kael shot to his feet. "Let her go." "Make me." The room held its breath. Kael's eyes swept across the table, calculating, measuring, looking for any ally, any hesitation. He found none. "If you kill her," he said slowly, "you lose your leverage over me. I'll have nothing left to protect, nothing to hold me back. I'll burn everything down just to make sure you go down with me. You'll try, but you'll fail, because you're one man against a coalition, and even the Wolf King can't win against those odds." The knife pressed harder. Celine felt blood trickle down her neck. "Last chance, Kael. Kneel. Admit defeat. Hand over your remaining territory peacefully. And maybe, I let your little translator live." Celine's vision blurred with tears, but she forced her voice steady. "Don't," she said in Russian. "Don't you dare kneel for her." Kael's eyes met hers. She saw the decision form, saw him choose her over his empire, saw him prepare to kneel. "No," she said again, louder. "You taught me that power is everything, that survival matters more than loyalty. So survive. Let me go. Save yourself." "I can't. You have to. Because if you kneel for me, you're admitting she's right, that you're weak, that love makes you vulnerable." Celine's voice cracked. "So prove her wrong. Show everyone in this room that the Wolf King doesn't bow. Not for anyone." Kael's expression shattered. "Celine!" "I love you," she said. The words came out clear, final. "And because I love you, I'm telling you to let me die. Build your empire back. Survive. Win." The room went silent. Irina's grip loosened fractionally. How touching. Then chaos exploded. The window shattered inward, not from bullets this time, but from bodies. Federal agents in tactical gear crashed through on ropes, weapons drawn, voices screaming commands. "FBI, nobody move. Hands where we can see them." Irina's knife jerked away from Celine's throat as she spun toward the threat. Kael moved. He crossed the table in one fluid motion, grabbing Irina's wrist and twisting. The knife clattered to the floor. His fist connected with her jaw, brutal, efficient, and she went down hard. Gunfire erupted. The cartel representatives drew weapons. The feds returned fire. The ballroom became a war zone. Kael grabbed Celine's hand. "Run!" They ran. Through the chaos. Through the smoke and screaming and the sound of bodies hitting marble. Out into the hallway where more agents were flooding in from the elevators. "Kael Voronin, stop!" Ethan stood at the end of the hall, weapon drawn, flanked by a dozen agents. Kael skidded to a halt. They were trapped. Agents behind them. Agents in front. No way out. Ethan moved forward slowly. "It's over. The warrants are executed early. Everyone in that room is under arrest, including you. Celine had nothing to do with this, Kyle said. She's not part of my organization. Let her go. She attended criminal meetings, facilitated illegal negotiations. She's complicit. Ethan's eyes found Celine's. Unless she testifies, agrees to cooperate, then I can offer immunity. Celine's heart hammered. This was it. Her final chance. Freedom or prison, safety or loyalty. She looked at Kyle, saw him nod almost imperceptibly, giving her permission to save herself. No, she said. Ethan's expression hardened. Don't be stupid. I'm not testifying, not cooperating, not betraying him. Celine stepped closer to Kyle, her hand finding his. You want to arrest me? Fine, do it, but I'm not turning on him to save myself. Then you're both going to prison. Then we go together. Kyle's hand tightened on hers. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Because you were right. Love is vulnerability, but it's also strength. And I'd rather be vulnerable with you than safe without you. The agents moved in, weapons trained. But before they could take another step, the fire alarm shrieked to life. Sprinklers activated, water cascading from the ceiling. Emergency lights flashed. And in the chaos, the confusion, someone grabbed Celine from behind, not an agent, someone else. A hand clamped over her mouth, an arm wrapped around her waist. She was dragged backward through a service door she hadn't seen. Kyle! Her scream was muffled. She saw him lunge forward, saw Ethan's men tackle him, saw him fight like a wild animal, screaming her name. Then the door slammed shut, and Celine was pulled into darkness. She woke in a moving vehicle. Her head throbbed. Her mouth tasted like chemicals. Chloroform, maybe. Her hands were zip-tied in front of her. The back of a van. No windows. Just darkness and the sound of tires on pavement. Someone sat across from her. Irina Volkov. Blood dripped from her split lip where Kyle had hit her, but she was smiling. Good. You're awake. We need to talk. Celine's throat closed. Where are you taking me? Somewhere Kyle will come looking. Somewhere public enough that he can't bring an army. Somewhere I can finally break him. Irina leaned forward. You were right about one thing. Love is vulnerability. And Kyle's love for you is the biggest vulnerability he's ever had. He'll kill you. Maybe. But first he'll watch me kill you, slowly, painfully, while he's powerless to stop it. Irina's smile widened. That's the real revenge. Not taking his empire, taking the one thing he values more than power. Celine's mind raced. The feds have him. He can't come for me. Oh, he'll come. Because I'm going to send him proof that you're alive, and a location, and a deadline, and he'll move heaven and earth to reach you before that deadline expires, even if it means breaking out of federal custody, even if it means sacrificing everything. You're insane. No, I'm thorough. Your boyfriend killed my brother 3 years ago, burned him alive in a warehouse fire to cover up a territory dispute. My father, Victor, he let it go. Said it was business, said revenge wasn't worth starting a war. Irina's expression went cold. But I'm not my father. And I've waited 3 years to make Kyle Voronin suffer the way my brother suffered. Helpless, watching everything he loves burn. The van hit a pothole. Celine's head cracked against the wall. When her vision cleared, they'd stopped. The doors opened. She was dragged out into freezing air and industrial darkness. A warehouse. Of course. Full circle. Irina's men zip-tied Celine to a chair in the center of the empty space. Floodlights clicked on, illuminating her like she was on stage. Irina set up a camera on a tripod, adjusted the angle, pressed record. Say hello to Kyle, she said. Celine stared into the lens. Thought about all the choices that had led here, all the lines she'd crossed, all the times she'd chosen loyalty over survival, and realized she'd do it all again. Kyle, she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Don't come for me. Whatever she's offering, whatever threat she's making, don't. You were right. I was the weakness that was going to destroy you. So let me go. Survive. Win. Irina laughed. How noble. Too bad he won't listen. She stopped recording and pulled out her phone, sent the video. Then she pulled out a knife. Now we wait. And while we wait, she trailed the blade lightly across Celine's collarbone. We practice what I'm going to do to you when he arrives. Celine closed her eyes, thought about Khalil's hands, his voice, the way he'd looked at her in the bar and admitted he was terrified of what he felt. Thought about her grandmother's words. Do whatever lets you look at yourself in the mirror afterward. She'd made her choices, crossed her lines, chosen love over survival. Now all she could do was hope it had been worth it. The knife pressed deeper. Blood welled. And somewhere across Chicago, in federal custody, Khalil Voronin watched a video of the woman he loved bleeding in a warehouse and began planning the most violent escape of his life. The federal holding facility was designed to contain Chicago's most dangerous criminals. Reinforced concrete, armed guards at every checkpoint, surveillance cameras covering every angle. Khalil Voronin walked out of it 43 minutes after watching Irina's video. He didn't break out. He negotiated. Ethan Mercer sat across from him in the interrogation room, his expression caught between fury and desperation. You want me to let you go, to walk out of here like you're not facing 20 federal charges? Yes. In exchange for what? Everything. Khalil's voice was flat, empty. Every name in my organization, every financial record, every piece of evidence you need to dismantle what's left of my empire. I'll testify against Victor Orlov, Carlos Mendez, every criminal who was in that ballroom tonight. I'll hand you a decade's worth of convictions on a silver platter. Ethan leaned back, studying him. Why would you do that? Because Irina Volkov has the woman I love tied to a chair in a warehouse somewhere in this city, and she's going to torture her to death unless I get there in the next 2 hours. So you have a choice. Let me go, get your testimony, close 100 cases, or keep me here, watch Celine Vale die on camera, and spend the rest of your career wondering if you could have saved her. The words hung in the air like a blade. Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the door, and spoke to someone outside. 5 minutes later, Khalil walked out of the building with a tracking anklet, an FBI escort, and a 2-hour window before every agent in Chicago came looking for him. Dimitri's second-in-command, a man named Alexei, who'd somehow survived the ballroom massacre, waited with a car 3 blocks away. The location? Khalil asked as he climbed in. South Industrial District, abandoned meatpacking plant. Irina's using it because it's far from federal eyes and has multiple exits. How many men does she have? At least 12, maybe more. And us? Alexei's expression was grim. 4. Everyone else is dead or in custody. 4 men against 12. Terrible odds. Khalil smiled, cold, sharp. Then we make every shot count. The warehouse loomed against the night sky like a monument to decay. Celine hung from chains now instead of sitting in the chair. Irina had gotten creative. Her arms were stretched above her head, toes barely touching the concrete floor. Every muscle screamed. Blood dripped from a dozen shallow cuts across her arms and collarbone. Nothing fatal, just painful. Irina was an artist when it came to suffering. He's not coming, Celine whispered. Her voice was raw from screaming. Irina checked her watch. 20 minutes left in the deadline. He'll come. Men like Khalil always come. It's their fatal flaw. They think they can save everyone. And when he does, when he walks through that door, then I kill you in front of him. Let him watch you die the way I watched my brother burn. Let him live with that image for the rest of his very short life. Celine's head lolled forward. She was so tired, so empty. Her grandmother was dead. Khalil was probably in a federal cell, and she was going to die in a warehouse, bleeding out while a psychopath monologued about revenge. This was how it ended. Not with redemption or escape or any of the things stories promised. Just blood and concrete and the cold realization that choosing love over survival didn't make you noble. It just made you dead. The explosion shook the building. Irina spun toward the sound. What? Gunfire erupted from the east entrance, screaming, the wet sound of bodies hitting concrete. Irina's men scrambled, weapons drawn, shouting in Russian. Then silence. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Kael walked out of the smoke like a ghost returning from hell. Blood covered his hands, his face, his torn shirt. He held a gun in one hand, not his, probably taken from whoever he'd just killed, and his eyes were utterly empty. "Let her go," he said quietly. Irina pulled a pistol from her jacket and pressed it to Celine's temple. "Or what? You'll kill me? You're outnumbered. Outgunned. One move and she dies. She dies anyway. You've already made that clear, so the question isn't whether I can save her. The question is whether you survive long enough to enjoy killing her." Kael raised his gun. Not at Irina. At Celine. Celine's breath caught. "Kael, I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked on the words. "I'm so sorry." He fired. The bullet hit the chain above Celine's head. It shattered. She dropped to the ground, her legs buckling. Irina's gun swung toward Kael. He was faster. 2 shots. Center mass. Irina stumbled backward, blood blooming across her chest. Her remaining men opened fire. Kael dove behind a concrete pillar. Celine scrambled toward a pile of crates, her chained wrists making movement clumsy and desperate. The warehouse became a war zone. Bullets sparked off metal. Concrete exploded into dust. Somewhere in the chaos, Alexei and the others burst through the west entrance, flanking Irina's men. The fight was brutal, close quarters, no room for mistakes. Celine watched from her hiding place as Kael moved through the violence like it was choreographed. Efficient, deadly. Every shot found its target. Every movement minimized exposure. This was who he really was. Not the man in expensive suits making calculated business decisions, but the weapon he'd forged himself into. The monster who'd survived by being more ruthless than everyone else. And somehow, watching him fight, watching him kill to reach her, Celine still couldn't make herself afraid of him. The last of Irina's men went down. Silence crashed over the warehouse like a wave. Kael stood in the center of the carnage, chest heaving, gun still raised. Irina lay against a support beam, blood pooling beneath her. She was still alive, barely. Kael walked to her slowly. "Your brother," he said. "The fire. You want to know the truth?" Irina's eyes flickered, focused on him with effort. "He wasn't just dealing in my territory. He was trafficking children, using my shipping routes to move them. When I found out, I gave him a choice: stop or face consequences. He chose to try to kill me instead." Kael's voice was cold, empty. "So yes, I burned him alive, and I'd do it again, because some lines you don't cross, not even for profit." Irina's laugh came out as a wet cough. "You're still a monster." "Yes, but so were you. The difference is, I own what I am. You hid behind revenge and pretended it made you righteous." He raised his gun. "Wait." Irina's hand lifted weakly. "Please." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Irina's body went still. Kael lowered the gun and turned to find Celine. She stood 10 feet away, chains still hanging from her wrists, blood and bruises covering her skin. They stared at each other across the carnage. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came." Kael crossed the distance, his hands gentle despite the violence still coating them. He pulled a knife from his pocket and cut through her chains. "Did you really think I wouldn't? You gave the feds everything, your empire, your organization, everything you built. None of it mattered without you." His voice cracked. "None of it was worth watching you die." Celine's legs gave out. Kael caught her, lowering them both to the concrete. She pressed her face against his chest and finally let herself break. All the fear, all the pain, all the impossible choices and the blood and the guilt, it poured out of her in shaking sobs that felt like they'd tear her apart. Kael held her through it. Didn't tell her it was okay. Didn't promise everything would be fine. Just held her while she shattered in his arms. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "The feds," Alexei said from somewhere nearby. "They're coming." Kael looked down at Celine. "Can you walk?" She nodded, wiping blood and tears from her face. He helped her stand. They made it out through a back exit just as federal vehicles screeched into the parking lot. The safe house was a tiny apartment in a neighborhood Kael owned through 3 shell companies. Bare walls, secondhand furniture, nothing like the penthouse. But it was warm, safe, hidden. Alexei brought a doctor who asked no questions and stitched Selini's cuts with practiced efficiency. Kale sat beside her the entire time, his hand gripping hers. When the doctor left, they sat in silence. "What happens now?" Celine finally asked. Kale stared at his blood-stained hands. "In 72 hours, I go to the federal building and start testifying. They'll want names, dates, financial records. I'll give them everything. Then I'll go to prison. Maybe 15 years. Maybe more. And me? Ethan's offering you immunity, full witness protection if you want it, new identity, relocation, the works." Celine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if I don't want that?" Kale looked at her, really looked at her. "You should want it. You should take it and run as far from me as you can. Build a normal life. Find someone who doesn't have a body count. Someone who won't drag you into federal investigations and mob wars." "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Kale's expression crumbled. "I want you safe, happy, free of all of this. I want you to forget you ever met me and live whatever life you were supposed to have." "That's not going to happen." "Why not?" "Because I love you." The words came out simple, clear. "And I've spent weeks trying to convince myself that loving you was wrong or stupid or self-destructive, but it's not. It's just what I feel, what I chose, and I'm not walking away from it just because it's hard. I'm going to prison, Celine, for a long time. You'd be waiting for a man who might not even survive the first year inside. Then I'll wait and visit. And when you get out, if you get out, I'll still be here." Kale shook his head. "You say that now, but in 6 months, when the reality sets in, when you're alone and I'm locked in a cell, I'll still love you." Celine cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not my grandmother. I'm not going to waste away waiting for someone. I'll build a life. Go back to school. Maybe finish my degree. Maybe find work that doesn't involve translating for criminals. But at the end of every day, I'll still love you. And I'll still be here." "Why?" "Because you taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. That I can survive things I never imagined. That choosing to be vulnerable with someone isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do." She smiled through her tears. "You gave me that. So I'm giving it back." Kale pulled her against him, his face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "No, you don't. But you have me anyway." They sat like that until dawn broke over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and ash. 3 months later. The courtroom was packed with journalists, federal prosecutors, and every criminal who'd ever done business with Kyle Voronin and was now terrified he'd name them. Kale sat at the witness stand in a prison jumpsuit, looking thinner but no less dangerous. He'd spent 12 weeks in federal custody, cooperating with investigators, mapping out every connection in his former empire. True to his word, he gave them everything. Victor Orloff was arrested at his Lake Forest mansion. Carlos Mendez was picked up at the border. A dozen other high-level criminals found themselves in cells, their empires dismantled, their fortunes seized. The prosecution called it the biggest organized crime takedown in Chicago history. Kale called it payment for Selini's survival. She sat in the gallery, watching him testify. She'd been granted immunity in exchange for her own limited cooperation. No charges, no prison time. Just the requirement that she stay available for questioning. She'd cut her hair short, dyed it darker, started using her middle name, Marie, in public. Small changes that helped her feel like a different person. Someone who could visit her boyfriend in prison without attracting attention. Someone who could rebuild from the ashes. Kale's eyes found hers across the courtroom. He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. Love disguised as survival. Hope buried under consequence. After the testimony ended, Celine was escorted to a private visiting room. Kyle sat on the other side of bulletproof glass, a phone pressed to his ear. She picked up her own phone. "Hi," she said. "Hi yourself." His voice was rough, tired. "You shouldn't be here. People recognize you. Let them. I'm not hiding anymore. Celine, the prosecution offered me a deal. Teaching position at Northwestern, assistant professor in the linguistics department. They think having my name associated with the university adds legitimacy. Makes me look like a victim who cooperated instead of a criminal who got away with it. Are you going to take it? Already did. Start next semester. She pressed her hand against the glass. Which means I'll be in Chicago, close enough to visit twice a week if they let me. Kale's throat worked. You should be rebuilding somewhere else. Somewhere that doesn't remind you of all of this. Chicago is where you are. So Chicago is where I stay. I got 22 years, reduced to 18 with good behavior. You're asking me to believe you'll wait almost 2 decades for a man who might not even... I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm telling you what I'm doing. Whether you believe it or not doesn't change it. Kael looked at her through the glass, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw tears in his eyes. I love you, he said. Broken, raw, real. I know, I love you too. I'm sorry for everything, for dragging you into my world, for all the choices you had to make, for... Stop. Celine's voice was firm. I made my choices. They were mine, not yours, and I'm not apologizing for them anymore. Neither should you. The guard tapped his watch. Time was almost up. I have to go, Kael said. But Celine... Yeah? Thank you for staying, for choosing me when you shouldn't have, for being the reason I remember what it feels like to be human. Thank you for the same thing. The line disconnected. Celine watched them lead him back through the security door, his orange jumpsuit stark against the institutional gray walls. Then she walked out of the federal building and into the Chicago afternoon. The city looked different now. Less threatening, less like a battlefield, and more like just a city, full of people making impossible choices and living with the consequences. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her grandmother's contact, the one she couldn't bring herself to delete, typed out a message she'd never send. I found my way, babushka. It's messy and complicated and probably not what you wanted for me, but it's mine, and I'm okay with that. She didn't hit send, just pocketed the phone and started walking. 18 years later. The prison gates opened at dawn. Kael Voronin walked out in civilian clothes, jeans and a plain shirt provided by the state, carrying a single box of possessions. He looked older, grayer, leaner from years of prison food and limited movement. But his eyes were the same, sharp, watchful, alive. A car waited in the parking lot. Celine leaned against it, wearing a coat against the early spring chill. Her hair was fully gray now, pulled back in a simple bun. Lines marked her face, from smiling, mostly, and from years of teaching students who reminded her why language mattered. She'd published 2 books, built a career, made a life that was hers and hers alone. And every Tuesday and Friday, for 18 years, she'd driven to the prison and sat across from Kael and talked about everything and nothing. He stopped 10 feet away, like he couldn't believe she was real. You're here, he said. Where else would I be? I thought... His voice caught. I thought eventually you'd move on, find someone else, someone who could actually be there. I did find someone. You. He was just temporarily unavailable. Kael closed the distance and pulled her into his arms. She felt smaller than he remembered, frailer. Time had marked them both. But she was still there, still real, still choosing him after all these years. What now? He asked against her hair. Now we figure out what normal looks like. I have an apartment, nothing fancy, but it's quiet, safe. Yours if you want it. What about your career, your life? I can't just... Kael. She pulled back to look at him. I spent 18 years building a life I could be proud of, a life that was mine, but it was always missing something, missing you. So yes, you can just... We both can. He searched her face, looking for regret, for hesitation, for any sign that she'd finally realized what a mistake this all was. He found none. I don't know how to be normal, he admitted. Neither do I. So we'll figure it out together. They climbed into the car. Celine drove them through Chicago as the city woke up around them, past the university where she taught, past the cemetery where her grandmother was buried, past the empty lot where the Velvet Room had been before the Fed seized it, past all the ghosts of who they'd been, toward whatever they were becoming. The apartment was small, cozy, books lined every wall. A cat, gray and imperious, watched them from the windowsill. You got a cat, Kael observed. You were gone 18 years. I needed company. Does it have a name? Dmitri. Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in nearly 2 decades. Of course you named it after him. He saved your life multiple times. Seemed appropriate. They stood in the tiny kitchen, surrounded by the mundane details of Celine's life. Coffee mugs, student papers waiting to be graded, a calendar marked with lecture dates and office hours. Normal? Boring? Perfect. I don't know if I can do this, Kyle said quietly. Be someone who just exists after everything. You'll learn. We both will. Celine took his hand. Because we're not the same people we were 20 years ago. We've changed, grown, survived things that should have killed us, and now we get to figure out who we are when we're not just surviving. And if I can't, if I'm too broken to be anything other than what I was, then we'll be broken together, and maybe that's enough. Cale pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I wasted 18 years. I could have been here, building this life with you. Instead, I was in a cell, paying for choices I made when I was too young and too angry to see another way. You weren't too young. You were desperate, trying to save someone you loved, just like I was. Celine's hand cupped his face. And those choices, as terrible as they were, they led us here, to this moment, to this life. So maybe they weren't wasted. Maybe they were just the price we had to pay to become people who could actually deserve each other. That's a hell of a price. Yes, but we're still here, still standing, still choosing each other. She smiled. I'd say that makes us survivors. And survivors get to write their own endings. Cale kissed her then. Soft, gentle, like they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. Maybe after all the violence and blood and impossible choices, they'd finally found the one thing that had eluded them from the beginning. Time. Not borrowed, not stolen, not paid for with blood money and federal testimony. Just time. Together. Building something small and quiet and theirs. 6 months later. Celine stood in front of her linguistics class, discussing the evolution of Russian dialects in immigrant communities. One student raised her hand. Professor Vale, is it true you used to work as a translator for organized crime? The question came from curiosity, not accusation. Celine's past was public record, something she'd learned to live with. Oops. Yes, she said simply. I did. For a period of time, I worked for someone who ran a criminal organization. I made choices I'm not proud of, crossed lines I wish I hadn't. Do you regret it? Celine was quiet for a moment. I regret the people who got hurt. I regret the violence. But do I regret the experience itself? The things I learned about survival and human nature and what we're willing to sacrifice for the people we love? She paused. No. Because those experiences made me who I am, and I've spent 20 years trying to use what I learned to help others understand how language shapes our choices, how words can be weapons or bridges, how communication can save lives or destroy them. The class was silent. My past doesn't define me, Celine continued, but it's part of my story, and I've learned that we don't get to choose which parts of our stories we keep. We only get to choose what we do with them, whether we let them destroy us or whether we use them to build something better. After class, she found Kyle waiting outside her office. He worked construction now. Union job, honest pay for honest work. It was hard, physical, nothing like running an empire. But it was his, legitimate, clean. How was class? He asked. They asked about my past again. What did you tell them? The truth. That I made mistakes. That I survived them. That I'm trying to be better. Kyle nodded slowly. Think they believed you? I don't know, but I believed me, and that's enough. They walked through campus together. Two people who'd survived hell and come out the other side, changed but intact. Students passed them without recognition. To them, Celine was just another professor. Kyle was just some guy picking up his girlfriend after work. Normal, anonymous, free. I got a letter from Alexei, Kale said as they reached the parking lot. He's out of prison, starting over in Seattle. Wanted to know if I'd be a reference for a job application. Are you? I told him the truth, that he's loyal, capable, trying to build a different life. Whether they hire him is up to them. That's good of you. It's what you would have done. Celine smiled. You're learning. Slowly, but yeah. They climbed into her car, the same one she'd driven to pick him up from prison. She refused to replace it, said it had earned its place. Where to? She asked. The cemetery? It's Tuesday. Every Tuesday, they visited Celine's grandmother's grave, brought flowers, sat on the grass, and talked to her like she was still there. It was ritual, remembrance, a way of honoring the woman whose life had cost so much to extend. They sat beside the headstone as the sun set over Chicago. Hi, babushka, Celine said in Russian. I brought someone you never got to meet. Well, not properly. Kyle placed flowers on the grave. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry the treatments weren't enough. Sorry for everything Celine went through because of me. She would have liked you, Celine said. Eventually, once she got past the whole criminal empire thing. You think? She always said strength mattered more than morality, that surviving was its own kind of courage. Celine leaned her head on Kael's shoulder. You survived. We both did. And we're building something she'd be proud of. I think that would have mattered to her. They sat in comfortable silence until the streetlights flickered on. Then they drove home. To their small apartment with its overflowing bookshelves and imperious cat. To their quiet life built on the ruins of everything they'd destroyed. To each other. Five years later. The wedding was small. Just a handful of people in a courthouse ceremony that lasted 12 minutes. No family. Celine's was gone. Kael's had disowned him decades ago. Just two witnesses, former students of Celine's who'd become friends, and a judge who didn't ask questions about the bride and groom's complicated past. Kael wore a suit Celine had helped him pick out. Nothing expensive, just clean, appropriate. Celine wore a simple dress. White. Because after everything, she still wanted that one traditional thing. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands, said vows they'd written themselves. I promise to choose you, Celine said, every day, even when it's hard, even when survival instinct says to run. I choose you. I promise to be worthy of that choice, Kael said, to spend every day trying to be the man you see when you look at me, to honor what we survived by building something worth surviving for. The judge pronounced them married. They kissed in the fluorescent lighting of a Chicago courthouse, and it was perfect. Afterward, they went to dinner at a small Russian restaurant that reminded Celine of her grandmother's cooking. They ate borscht and pelmeni and toasted with vodka to the people who hadn't survived to see this moment. To Dmitri, to Katya, to Celine's grandmother, to everyone who'd been lost along the way. We made it, Celine said, raising her glass. Against all odds, Kael agreed. Do you think they'd be proud? The people we used to be? Kael considered this. No. I think they'd be confused, maybe disappointed. They were survivors. They wouldn't understand why we chose each other over safety, over rebuilding our empires, over all the things we gave up to be here. And the people we are now? The people we are now understand that surviving isn't the same as living, that power without connection is just elaborate loneliness, that the only empire worth building is the one you share with someone you love. Celine smiled. When did you become a philosopher? When I spent 18 years in a cell with nothing but time to think about what mattered. Turns out, stripped of everything else, all that mattered was you. They walked home through Chicago's streets. The city had changed in the 25 years since Celine had first served champagne at Velvet Room. Neighborhoods gentrified, buildings torn down and rebuilt. The criminal landscape transformed by federal prosecutions. But some things remained the same. The lake still stretched dark and endless. The wind still cut through you in winter. And somewhere in the shadows, people still made impossible choices and paid impossible prices. Celine and Kael just weren't those people anymore. They were something else now. Survivors. Partners. Two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. Do you ever miss it? Celine asked as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. The power. The control. The empire. Every day, Kael admitted. But then I come home to you. To this life. And I remember that I'd rather have this small, quiet, honest life, then all the power in the world. Because power made me a monster. You made me human again. You were always human, you just forgot for a while. And you helped me remember. They unlocked their door. Dimitri the cat meowed indignantly at their late return. Kyle fed him while Celine made tea. They sat on their second-hand couch, surrounded by books and memories and the quiet certainty of shared survival. I love you, Celine said. Simple, clear, true. I love you too, Kyle replied. More than I thought I was capable of loving anything. Think we'll make it? Another 25 years? I think we've already survived the worst. Everything after this is just living. Celine leaned against him, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Good. Because I'm not done with you yet. Not done with you either. Outside their window, Chicago glittered like a promise kept. The city that had tried to destroy them. The city where they'd found each other. The city they'd survived. Together. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it all again. Build their small life. Teach their classes. Feed their imperious cat. Love each other despite everything and because of everything. Not because it was easy, but because it was theirs. Their choice. Their survival. Their story. And after all the blood and violence and impossible decisions, after all the lines crossed and prices paid, they'd earned the right to write their own ending. So they wrote it together. In quiet moments and ordinary days. In a language only they fully understood. The language of two people who'd chosen each other when logic said to run. Who'd survived when survival should have been impossible. Who'd found love in the darkest places and refused to let it go. Even when it cost them everything. Especially then. Because in the end, that was what love was. Not the easy choice, but the choice you made anyway. The line you crossed knowing you could never go back. The person you chose even when choosing them meant losing everything else. And Celine Vale and Kyle Veronin had made that choice. 25 years ago in a private dining room where a waitress spoke Russian and a criminal saw something worth protecting. They'd made it again and again through violence and betrayal and federal testimony. Through prison visits and lonely nights and the slow rebuilding of shattered lives. Through every moment when walking away would have been easier. And they were making it still. In this small apartment, in this quiet life. In this love that had survived everything the world threw at it. They were choosing each other every single day. And that was their victory. Not power, not empire, not survival, but love. Fierce, complicated, hard-earned, real. The kind of love that transformed monsters into men, victims into survivors, two broken people into something resembling whole. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.